Good to go.
All right. Where am I? What's happening? All right. I call to order this Thursday, November 9th meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:06 p.m. In attendance, we have planning commissioners Carolyn Conant, Miles Lofton, myself, Kai Marienfeld, and Mikkel, and I'm Leighton. I'm spacing on your last name. I apologize. As well as city staff, Anna Englund, Corey Shirtleff, Alexi Lamb, and Bryce Rogers. Thank you. I was like, you're not Summer.
We also have Richard Lori.
And Richard Lori as well. We have our city council liaison, Luke Wojciechowski, in the audience, as well as folks who I assume are here for aspects of the meeting. And if they will announce themselves, if they come up, we can do introductions then. All right. First item of business is citizens to be heard. We do have a couple public hearings this evening, so this would be for things that are not on the agenda as public hearings tonight. And we did not receive any written comment for anything, as far as I know. Anyone here as a citizen to be heard? All right. Okay. Next item is approval of minutes from our November 2nd meeting, which was last week. That was fast. Nice. That was a special meeting that we had last week, November 2nd. Has anyone had a chance to look those over? We'll entertain motions or amendments.
I move that we approve the minutes from last meeting with a few changes to the names of who said what. There's, I think, 4 places that should say me instead of Jill.
Okay. Yes.
With those changes.
Great. So there were several times where Mikkel was talking that I think just listening probably to the recording, it seemed like it was Jill. So we can make have those changes made for the public record. So we have a positive motion on the floor with some tweaks. Any discussion, or actually we need a second first?
I'll go ahead and second it.
All right, Miles seconded. Any discussion about that? Any issues with making those changes? All right.
Just in all favor.
Sure, yeah.
If you'd like to call it.
Sure.
Sure.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes 4-0 with commissioners in attendance. Next, we have our first public hearing of the evening, item 4.1, which is a public hearing and consideration of adoption of resolution 26/2023, a resolution to adopt the 2023 Moab Area Affordable Housing Plan update as prepared by the Moab Area Affordable Housing Task Force, updating Appendix A of the City of Moab General Plan. This is a public hearing and possible action on recommending this to council. Corey or Anna?
Yeah, I'll begin by opening, and the way the title was phrased, I think is significant to why we're reviewing it tonight in the form of the public hearing, which we can have open and can close at the convenience of the commission. But really, there are not going to be additional briefings or presentations beyond what the original discussion held with the housing task force that presented the last time. We do have those presenting members here that can also answer follow-up questions, but really what has happened is, as we're advancing this on to city council, the city recorder and myself went back through the history and processing of what was the original update for 2017 of the original housing plan, and the intent of that plan to update our general plan officially as an Appendix A. Unfortunately, that was just kind of an aspect that never formally updated. It met all the approvals, it went through the full process. They just didn't kind of close in with actually updating it, which led to the discussion, the kind of the deviation where we led to last time of processing this as a plan approval, similar to how we will be processing the sustainability plan and our parks and recreation master plans, which are not direct exhibits or appendix of the general plan. This, however, will be. So this is a very important aspect of noticing, holding the public hearing, and then advancing that recommendation. Given we've worked through the data set from that 2023 plan update, as well as what the goals and objectives were at this current time, but also anticipating that the council will be workshopping that with the Housing Task Force, I think the commission's in a good place to maintain its existing understanding of the plan. Nothing else has amended. So that'll conclude, I think, the staff's briefing. We can turn it back over to commission for any other discussion while the hearing is open, or if you'd like to close the hearing and then enter into discussion. And then we have our presenting Housing Task Force members here that can answer any outstanding questions and then advance with a recommendation. Positive with modifications, table, or negative.
Thank you.
That's it for me. So if we want to close the public hearing, we can do that and then engage in discussion, or just leave it open.
Yeah.
Engage in any discussion or make a motion, but we'd want to close the public hearing prior to making any official motions.
Great. Well, I haven't opened the public hearing yet, actually.
Oh, well, there was the briefing prior to the,
Yeah.
sorry, that was my mistake. So let's go ahead and open that public hearing.
Yes. All right. I will open the public hearing on item 4.1 at 6:12 p.m. Is there anyone here to speak about this item in any fashion, even if you're someone that may have been involved in the drafting of said thing that we're recommending? You're also welcome to make any notes or anything if you'd like to. All right. We have members of the Moab Area Housing Task Force who are in the audience. Laura Harris, Caitlin Myers, but all good. Okay. Thanks, you all. Is anyone else here for the public hearing? And again, yeah. If you would approach the microphone, introduce yourself.
So my name is Richard. I'm the grant writer with the City of Moab and transit coordinator. A lot of grants require an affordable housing plan as a prerequisite, so this will help with the grant cycle.
All right. Thank you, Richard. That was Richard Laurie. Thank you very much. All right. We did not receive any written public comment about this item. So I will close the public hearing at 6:13 p.m. And now we have some options on the table as far as resolution. We can, of course, have more discussion as a commission if we'd like, but I do think we were very well briefed on this item previously, which is really nice. And I'm excited it's going to be part of the general plan. I know how important that is. I should say if council passes, it will be. So. Okay, we can entertain a motion as always. There are several options and a proposed motion in the agenda summary in our packet.
I'll move that the City of Moab Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to City Council on the adoption of the 2023 Moab Area Affordable Housing Plan.
All right, we have a motion to approve from Carolyn.
I'll second that one.
And we have a second from Miles, both very enthusiastic. Thank you guys. Any further discussion before we take a vote? This is great. This data is invaluable. Thank you to the members of the Housing Task Force and city staff and all the people that were involved in drafting this incredibly depressing but very useful document that I think does give us hope too. So, okay. I think probably a roll call on this.
Sure. We had Carolyn made the motion.
Yep.
Miles second. All right.
And Miles was the second.
Whiteboard
Okay.
tonight, fancy.
We're back to the whiteboard.
We're back to the whiteboard. I like it. No more,
The whiteboard.
no more cell phone on the wall.
Sorry. Yeah.
That was last.
Let's redo that roll call.
Okay.
Mikhail,
Aye.
Kaya,
Aye.
Miles,
Aye.
Carolyn.
All right. Our motion passes unanimously 4-0. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of you.
Yeah.
All right. Next, our next item, 4.2, public hearing and consideration of approval of Moab City Ordinance 2023-14, an ordinance amending the text of the Moab Municipal Code to include additional regulations required through the International Dark Sky Association certification and resolve outstanding discrepancies within those existing regulations. This is, again, a public hearing and possible action, something that we have workshopped in previous meetings, including last week, pretty significantly. Corey, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'll, to a degree, let the commission drive this briefing. And again, as it doesn't appear that we have anybody in the chambers immediately for a comment on this, I think we'll engage into the full briefing. And there have been amendments made between the noticing period and what will be a staff recommendation added to the red line draft that you had in your packet tonight. But I think at this point, we will open up, if I can, the newest red line, meaning it has a few little minor amendments that you have not seen. We'll walk through those without presentation, but directly in the ordinance, similar to how we did last meeting to reflect on those. The major difference between our red line set that we have tonight and the two that we were balancing previously is that they are now consolidated formally. So we are through that, seeing a lot of the actual language that's going to be produced versus we're contemplating these concept integrations. I had the Word doc prep. Just give me a second. I have to go back into our drive. All right. Sure, everyone can see this decently well. Included in the PDF redline draft, there were a number of comments made from what had kind of been that working group between the mayor and council members, and then myself responding to rationale behind some of these amendments. I'm at this point, I think I'm going to breeze through a number of what the red lines include. Is that legible for everyone to see? Or do I need to blow that up a little bit?
A little bigger would be great.
What we might see is the comments on the side might get chopped off a little bit. We'll go here for now. Alrighty. So again, I'll mention title amendments, and then we'll get into specific amendments that were more complex and deserve a little bit more time. So within the title, intent, and purpose chapter, just a minor amendment to include the idea of regulating against light trespassing glare. General provisions, this is shifting what that scope and purpose statement was into a little bit more of a formal design, including what would be, I think when we do our rewrite, likely a outdoor lighting chapter, as opposed to what we're doing now as an aspect of the supplementary requirements section. That's more minutia that is kind of behind the scenes for staff. Really, when it's a chapter on its own, it does kind of maintain its own distinct enforcement and purpose sections. It really does stand alone as its own ordinance, as opposed to this is originally when we were designing ordinances kind of through the late 2005, 2015. This was a convenient way for the citizens to engage with the code that felt like we were consolidating code all in the same place, but we've gotten so much involved into that chapter now, it's almost too confusing because it's too large. So breaking it out at this point is actually more helpful, I think, for citizens trying to navigate the code. But again, most of this is really refining into the original whereas of why we're doing this, what it is we're trying to regulate, as well as what we're trying to preserve. One of the major aspects within this is kind of, again, redefining that direct illumination, which we pretty exhaustively reviewed the last meeting. Within this, we'd moved around some sections, so we're going to see major blocks of red line. That doesn't necessarily mean we're cutting that. It means we're probably relocating a number of those things. But within definitions specifically, the direct illumination areas, we've had some updates to these images. We're actually going to work with Alexi to refine these even further. So it's going to display what it is we're seeing here, but they're going to be beautified a little bit more aesthetic. But we won't go into the content of this just at this moment. I think we covered it pretty completely during our last meeting. Where I do want to pause here briefly is in temporary lighting within the definition section. This is going to be different from what we had even discussed during this last meeting. The more time we were spending getting into what is kind of a mock process of evaluating all the possible contingencies of an application coming through or variations of a property developing, breaking this out into two separate definitions actually became more logical and far easier to regulate. So what we're seeing is, rather than temporary lighting, kind of that two-word structure, is into temporary outdoor lighting and temporary string lighting, which is kind of what we've been aiming at for a lot of our discussion, meaning string lights, bistro lights, those types of nomenclatures or characteristics of temporary plug-in lighting. But there's a whole additional category, and especially with holiday seasons coming through, lighting comes in a number of different capacities. So it doesn't have to just be a string light to be something you plug into the wall and is temporarily existing. So that temporary outdoor lighting actually gives us a better grab in the exemptions section later. That was the reason for separating those. And also within the string lighting, giving us a better zoning administrator review of those aspects, where those are probably going to be utilized by both commercial and residential properties more frequently. Again, sorry for scrolling through kind of in this rapid way, but I do want to make sure I'm seeing everything. I've spent a lot of time pouring through this ordinance, so it's almost hard to remember what it is we spoke about last time versus what I've been reviewing in my own head over the last couple of days. So once I get through this cursory scroll, I do want to open it up maybe for the public hearing, but then enter in discussion where we can actually talk about a number of these amendments. Again, a lot of these redlined areas being relocated. Within the lighting output areas, this was one of the later discussions that we had about budget lighting versus prescriptive lighting review methods. We opted to draft in a way that is a more prescriptive option versus the budget. That aligns with a lot of the existing aspects and also some of the proposed aspects in a much cleaner way than some of the budget material that we were looking through. But that's what we'll see a lot of the red lines here, and then also later on under small area developments. One aspect that is new here, I might point out, was the idea of we actually generated that language about the threshold of safety lighting. Let's see here. This is just TLO, or total light output. I think it's a little bit later on here. Here we go. So at the end of this section, talking about exceeding lumen count limits or total light output TLOs. So essentially, if it's required lighting by some regulatory fashion or official, that gives you the ability to exceed that threshold, whether it's the 50,000 lumens per acre in a commercial development, for example, or whatever it is. But that does not allow you to continue to add additional safety lighting, and it's just blanket exempt. You just add as much as you want as long as it's qualifying as safety. It's the minimum required qualifying threshold. And then in addition to that, what we're calling those cookies or aesthetic lighting cannot be applied if you're at 100% or in excess of that lighting. Aesthetic lighting can only be applied if you're under threshold or under your TLO. Okay. So we talked about that a number of times, but I think we finally actually had it articulated here for the first time in true structure. The language under lighting hours is a little cumbersome. It had to be so, I think, to make sure we're putting in regulatory thresholds that we can enforce cleanly, but it doesn't read very clean. So if we need to come back and explain that a little bit further, we can. We did talk about lighting color a little bit last time, that staff is recommending maintaining the 3,000. I think there's a number of reasons that I think that's very important, but we can kind of let that be as the commission, I think, is on board with that. This is a particular section, this being redlined, this is required by IDA as what is basically a policy for how a municipality or whatever the certification jurisdiction is going to update its lighting. But what we found, and this is a discussion we've had in the past, is this would actually be better handled through a city resolution for our own buildings rather than putting it into the land use code. So it's more about how we're going to govern ourselves versus it shouldn't be in the land use code because it's only applying to us in one particular way. So we're extracting this as it's not a public land use element. So this aspect will be probably coming back before the planning commission, but in a resolution policy format. This is a change we made today through the sustainability department, as well as coordinating with Richard, who had originally helped draft a little bit of this language. Minor change here about outdoor recreation areas and athletic fields and publicly owned facilities, just making it very clear. It doesn't matter who owns it. Athletic fields, outdoor recreation areas, they all have to comply to these rules. And it was just, could have been a little bit questionable because of the way the language was phrased previously. So as this is new language, taking just a second to read it, rather than outdoor recreation areas or athletic fields at publicly owned facilities, we're saying athletic facilities and outdoor recreation areas. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but we spent some time with that to make sure that that qualified through our purposes. Again, moving down through to amortization. Within this particular section, application and review procedures, this is where we had relocated our exemptions and exceptions section. So the exceptions was a brand new concept that we brought through based on discussions we've had, and especially drafting and template for land use off of our landscaping ordinance. So this mirrors a very similar format, which again, if we move this into its own chapter, I would like to make as much consistency between these types of regulatory processes as possible. So within these, the exemptions were basically broken into two specific categories. One is exemptions from just one particular aspect of dark sky, which is the shielding, and then one is exempt from all the requirements. The one that we've placed temporary string lights is under shielding exemptions, meaning we still are going to count your lumens. We're still going to make sure it's the correct temperature, but the bulb doesn't necessarily have to be fully shielded. It can be, and if it is, that's basically compliant lighting, so it doesn't even have to be in this chapter. But if it's not, we have what has become considered a curfew clause, or that this temporary lighting shall be extinguished by 10 p.m. And we have a whole lighting hours section to comply with rather than recreating it just for this exemption. In addition to that, we added language about this temporary string lighting not flashing, blinking, fading. There is additional discussion about observably, I can't remember the technical term, when a number of illumination bulbs, like a ticker, a screen ticker, move, it appears to create movement of light, even though it's just flashing on and off. That's prohibited for signs currently. We, with these string lights, didn't think that was a qualifying factor, as the zoning administrator would probably and very likely determine that's not string lighting. That's a different illumination source. That's maybe temporary lighting or some sort of performative lighting. So it didn't really apply here. But this exemption section, I think, captures what it is we were wanting to do with string lights. Now, we can come back to this, but I do want to briefly chat about, and this is, again, something Alexi with sustainability brought up as well, is temporary outdoor lighting, specifically for holidays. So we've seen a lot of people with, maybe say you have an inflatable snow globe that glows and has light, or Skeletons the Dance. I don't know, between these two particular holidays that we seem to be identifying, there's more than just string lights that is in temporary outdoor holiday lighting. So within this language, this was something Kalen provided language-wise. I can see why it was a little confusing. We band-aided a little bit of language to make it a little bit more legally qualifying versus the way that the light's being referenced anyway. But within holiday lighting, we're going to basically say that's a specific type of discretionary lighting, because we can't narrow it down to just very particular single luminescent bulbs on a string. At this point in day, with technology, there's so many varieties of light. We can't encapsulate it all here in the code, so it's kind of captured under this bigger umbrella. But within that, if you have static standard illumination that falls under this qualification, say holiday lights or traditional Christmas lights, those for this time period can remain on all night. But say you have a temporary illumination source that is your snow globe, or if this is what I was kind of talking about with Alexi earlier today, in my mind, we've all seen those YouTube videos of the houses that coordinate to music and they're all over the place, and it's pretty impressive. But with that, that's not acceptable to be going on all night for neighbors for obvious reasons. But we don't maybe want to diminish that ability or creativity for people to celebrate or exercise their private rights in their own way. So what we've determined is that 10 p.m. threshold shall apply to a lot of this. So if you have dancing skeletons or snow globes or whatever it is, your
done.
illumination display can be on till 10 p.m. But 10 p.m. and beyond, that's nighttime.
Then your 12-foot skeleton needs to go dark.
Your 12-foot skeleton needs to go dark, but maybe your static house strung lights.
If your 12-foot skeleton does not blink, flash, strobe, or otherwise, does it or does it not need to go dark?
If it's uplit, then yeah.
Okay.
Not quite.
I'm just trying to
No,
find the
that's it.
lines
No,
here.
that's exactly it. If it can be considered, and this is where the glare aspect comes in to a less of a funny point, like all the flashing, all that stuff, that's pretty obvious. But the glare, if it is a low ambient static illumination for the holiday, no, it wouldn't have to be extinguished. But if it's creating glare, or it's not strobing, so it is creating glare some way, or what you might consider that really harsh lighting, even during the holiday season, that's not appropriate either.
Sure.
So this language is balancing this very loose, very challenging aspect of lighting, which is where we want to do things, but we also got to have language that makes sense. So
At some point, this would be like a complaint-based enforcement thing. Like if somebody
Correct.
had flashing projectors on their house, that's how this would be taken care of. Like
That's
in actual.
exactly right. So timestamp picture, we would pursue it. It's a one-off situation, but it could be pursued. If we won't obviously have code enforcement out at 2 a.m. to be enforcing
Yeah,
things, but the PD is an extensive branch that can enforce municipal code. So it's not something that is unenforceable, but it's as enforceable as we possibly can make it, without having our enforcement team on a 24-hour nighttime patrol. But yeah, that's exactly right. It'd be a complaint-based system.
Seems like the best balance I think we can figure out.
I think it's as reasonable as we can get, because
Mhm.
again, with both this ordinances and many, is we're starting to look into the gray, is in as many aspects, I'd like us to permit things 100% or prohibit them. But there are some areas like this where compromise or mitigation in the middle, it's needed. And
Yeah.
that's where I'd like to spend our energies, where it's worth it doing those things, but applying that middle mitigation to everything is too exhaustive. We just don't have the capacity to do that. Now, getting beyond the exemptions, this exceptions section is new. It's framed consistent with our landscaping exception. It does ultimately make the planning commission the determining factor in that. It gives a standard of criteria for which the applicants can submit. Additionally, it has the burden of having a light specialist, for lack of a better word. We tried to capture, because there really there are becoming, there are degrees for light architecture, light engineering, light specialty, and light professional lighting is really, it's kind of, we were doing the research for this of who is the authority on these, it's really actually kind of a theater performance degree. So it's not really an architect as you might think, but it is becoming more and more of a common and a kind of acknowledged profession and specialty. But within that, we kept it as open as we could to say, you need to have somebody that knows what they're doing with lighting, an engineer, electrician even, they can vouch for whatever it is you're proposing as an exception. So there's some professionalism that is required on the applicant's behalf. They can't just come in and apply for anything just because they just don't like our code. They have to kind of have that burden of proof to show why it is they can't reasonably meet our code. But then it goes on to the zoning administrator for review, who will offer a recommendation based on staff review, and then planning commission ultimately is the deciding factor there. And then, of course, and this is what we identified last time, is a variance is always open to any citizen or a person that has, I can't remember the exact term is, but it's legal or financial concern of a property. So they don't even have to be a citizen there, but they have to have stake in the community, can apply for that variance. The only problem with the variance is it's not what most people often think. It's actually a separate legal process through an administrative law judge, third party, because there is a significant reason that it's a takings prevention, meaning we're not taking your rights, or we're eliminating any use of your property. So it's a pretty high bar required to actually be granted a variance. Anyway, moving on to amortization, we've maintained the proposed amortization process that the working group was pushing, moving it out to 2029, which is pretty crazy to even say that year out loud. But what that does is give us that, what we've been considering third punch maintained, and then allowing the special provisions or nuisance lighting to be the first punch, and legal nonconforming to be that second punch, to try to work through a lot of our objectionable lighting in the community. Within this section, these are, again, were amendments to carve out a support that special provisions area, and you'll see they're still bracketed. I've communicated with co-compliance specifically to how it is we can maintain the intent of these words, abate nuisances, but again, very much like variance, those are legal terms that is what we're trying to do, but we can't use those words. So we are going to find a supplement that gets to the same intent and purpose behind those words, but we're not getting into an area that is going to call us into a totally different title just from using the word. And then down on to special provisions, a little minor amendment here, just again, refining in from light sources being an objectionable aspect to direct illumination. So that's really that kicking category that we discussed of, if you can see light, it doesn't mean you're under the intensity of that light. So spill is not a category which is a violation level category. It has to be truly directed at you and you receiving that high intensity cone before it becomes nuisance lighting. And then additionally, we did work with Richard and Lexi to confirm we are meeting all of the IDA certification standards to this most recent checklist, which is why the sign code's being brought up into this ordinance as well. And I think at that point, that really covers most of the major changes from staff. Or Alexi, if I've missed something, we did not talk about twinkle lights just yet. I might wait till later in the discussion. We'll get to that. It's back towards holiday lighting, but we can get into a little bit of a sticking place. So I want to make sure if we have any bigger level questions, we handle those first. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing for at least this briefing aspect and kind of the overview of amendments and changes. And then Kai, I don't know if we want to open the public hearing, see what we have, maintain it open for, I don't know, I'd just
Yeah.
love to get some commentary, but
I know. I know.
everybody'd like
It's,
to be on this.
can I reiterate a desire for our communications director at the city to put things like this on the city's social media? It was not there again. I don't really know how else to do that short of, our citizen commissioners or city staff taking it on themselves in the department. I just feel like this, every time we have a public hearing, I would love for it to be on our social media. I just don't, I think it's a little frustrating, honestly. Because then that would at least give others like all of us the ability to share that
Right.
post instead of trying to generate the posts ourselves. I think that would be really great.
I think we did get some traction with that. I will speak for staff on that, meaning communication specifically. There, as we're approaching the end of the year, there's a lot of big items. So this is
Yeah.
one of many, especially with the election and canvassing going on with communications. We're as big as this is, we're lower on the totem, and then even specifically within that department, they were having some challenges over the last couple of weeks. So I'll give them some credit on this one, maybe saying, hey, planning staff didn't support them well enough in this. So I'll take kind of the credit of saying planning staff didn't do as much as we should have on this one because communication was at a decreased capacity. So that will be noted, not just for us to pass along the communications, but I think for staff, we'll do a better effort of trying to advance these.
And if there's a way that any of us can help with that, I just feel like it might be adding like an unnecessary middle person.
Sure. No.
I'm happy to help. I'm happy to like not just criticize and actually help solve the problem.
Totally.
But-
Well, I think I think between the 3 staff members, I think we'll have capacity that we'll just need to formalize that system. But once it's formalized, we're pretty efficient. We just hadn't formalized that since we spoke for
Like if the
communications
word
last.
public hearing is in our agenda,
It should just
it
automatic.
it should trigger something on
Totally.
social. Cause I know we do a very good job of like legal noticing,
Right.
but the actual notice, I
Like,
think, is the problem.
truly spreading.
Truly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are talking about expanding our, like maybe having an open house page or something like that when we have bigger items like this that people can go to
Oh, it's a
and
good
look at
idea.
on our
Yeah.
website. We just haven't gotten it organized yet,
Totally.
so.
Or like events, can the city create Facebook events? Cause I feel like that reminder format is actually pretty effective.
It might be a tactic. I know Granicus, I think that's the name, Pound the Table, formerly Pound the Table. So our new platform,
Uh-huh.
we're working on launching that, which
Yeah.
will have all of these things already baked in. So I hate kind of putting off like,
Yeah.
we're gonna do it. Because we've been saying that since we were awarded that
Mhm.
contract. So, but I think that is the intention, is that once that system, it already has baked in any kind of a mechanism like that. Anytime planning post public hearing, it's auto threaded to go through those routes and post in multiple locations.
Yeah.
So that we're not actually going, like you say, kind of manually inserting
Mhm.
it. It'll update. But that's something I think with Lisa, we can chat about what the lapse time between that system being installed is and what we can do in the meantime
Totally.
between those. Because
Totally.
you're 100% right that we're just dying for commentary, and we'll get it, just
Yeah.
not here,
I know.
unfortunately.
Well, yeah,
So
that's what's
that's
hard.
really where we do want it.
Like I'll do a Canva post and send it to
Yeah.
when it gets either. But then the problem is also we often don't have the final agenda until
Well, in this case, like yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so. But we are aware it's something that I think everybody wants to do better. So thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry, I'm like a lot of commentary, but I do think that's what's difficult is why it often feels like one or two individuals have an outsized say, because it's literally like if no one shows up for the public hearing and one person shows up to the public hearing, that's the only input, the only feedback that we
Mhm.
have.
Mhm.
So I think it's important. Like a 2-sentence email counts
Mhm.
like just as much though. I just want to make sure that people
Mhm.
know that. If anything, it gives us the opportunity to actually ponder on something for a bit before having to make a decision about it, like at a public hearing if you speak. So, All right, thanks for letting me just bring that up again. All right, that said, I will open this public hearing on item 4.2 at 6:46 PM. Once again, anyone? Richard, you want to comment on lighting? Alexi? Mel? Caitlin? All right. I'm just gonna call out everybody's name in the audience right now. You don't have anything to say, candidate Myers? All right.
About twinkle lights?
Yeah. Thoughts on twinkle lights?
Yeah, we'll get
Here
there.
we are. All right. Okay. Yeah, come on, man.
Hey, come on.
Yeah. If anything, you're just knowledgeable about all this, so it's nice to hear from you.
So my input, I'm
Introduce yourself again.
Richard Laurie, the transit coordinator and grant writer for the city of Moab. And my comment relates to one of the next items, and that's about an economic development grant that we have. And I think that for me personally, I believe that dark sky lighting is more attractive and it's beautiful. And I like lighting, so I hope that we can keep our streets safe while also not blinding people and maintaining the night sky. So I think that economic development and just walkability and creating a beautiful downtown and a place to live, that dark sky is gonna help with that. So
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. All right. Come introduce yourself.
You gotta go start pounding the street outside.
I know. I'm like,
Yeah.
excuse me, random person leaving the library. Would you like to make a public comment? Okay. Sorry.
Caitlin Myers. Yeah, so my comment is I've heard from a few of the seniors and as I've been canvassing around, particularly with dark skies, there's a concern about decreasing the overall level of light in the community has severe impacts on older folks that have vision problems, people with disabilities. And so I just would encourage the planning commission to keep that in mind. You know, I think that there's you guys are walking a middle ground of preventing light trespass, but then also making sure that we are maintaining a high level of safety, particularly for our disabled citizens. So that's my comment.
Thanks, Caitlin. All right. I will close the public hearing at look at that, 2 minutes. We took 2 whole minutes. Thank you guys. At 6:48 PM. All right. Any discussion with commissioners?
Well, so I was looking through the exemptions and exceptions and variances, and I guess my main concern the last time we talked about this was the amortization schedule and how that could force someone who did not have the financial means to make the adjustments to their lighting, or at least put them in a not just legal non-conforming position, but in a like genuinely, I guess, illegal position. And I was wondering if staff or anyone had thought about, essentially, when I thought about the exceptions or applying for a variance, like there does still seem to be a barrier there if you have to get an electrician involved or a lighting expert involved to put this exemption application through or otherwise. That doesn't to me seem like a tool that someone could use if they were interested in compliance, but just simply didn't have the funds at the time. And I didn't know if staff had considered some kind of temporary exception or something where you could put in an application that was not especially financially stressful, that would allow you, you know, I mean, I know 2029 is a long way off as well, but you know, if this blindsided someone in 2029 and they were like, oh my gosh, you know, I have to change out outdoor lighting that is permanently installed and requires an electrician to change out, is there a way for them to reach out to the city and say, I'm interested in compliance, but I need to do it slowly, essentially, but have like a genuine process for that, rather than what I would think of as like a kind of, I guess, more of like a discretion based thing on what the city wants to pursue and doesn't want to pursue. Like, obviously they're going to be notified if nuisance lighting comes up first.
Mhm.
But if for some reason they missed some of the notifications during the legal non-conforming period and then hit amortization, is there any way for them to just say, hey, I would like to be compliant, but I just can't afford it right now? And, work towards it without having to come up with a bunch of cash for something like that right away.
It's a very good question.
That's a good question. I think when I'm listening to that, I think we can break that down if we want to and take the time into what could be the three categories of review. So first, and this, you framed this really nicely, is what we're kind of considering this first punch or nuisance lighting. So they're alerted immediately after this ordinance is approved that they have lighting that is within the next little while needs to come into compliance. That would be initiated through our compliance code enforcement and compliance team, and then the processing for that. And then once that enters in the process, you've received your warning of violation, and then depending upon the process, and this is really, we ought to have a special session with compliance so that you guys can see what our process looks like. And I think that would be really informative to how we're drafting a lot of this language. But once you're engaged in that process, it becomes a very customizable and negotiable process. We do have standards, and we meet those because we can't act arbitrarily through the process. And well, like, we really like you and you're really nice, so we're going to treat you really nice. Oh, you're kind of a person, so we're not going to treat you so nice. We are very consistent and very clear with our findings of how we approach them. But if there are clear reasons behind something, so for instance, means is a major thing, because it's not just with lighting, it could be with weeds. I mean, this past summer we dealt with that constantly. Approaching elderly folks, their yards were in really bad shape. They got a warning of violation. Say, look, I'd love to, I'm just not capable of it, or I can't afford to do it right now. We become advocates and facilitators towards compliance. The end goal is compliance. So what means we take to get there, it can take different paths depending on the particulars of that situation. So in this instance, for something like that, they'd be entering first into that compliance scenario. They could give us that route of saying, well, we're gonna keep your case open, but we're not gonna be sending you violations every week or even every day. We're gonna have this one violation, and we're gonna work with you on the process, and we're gonna give you, I mean, we've given people in the past up to over a year to come into compliance, depending on the severity of their situation. Now that's discretionary based within the compliance structure. So that's a really good example of how we might handle it in that scenario, where we're going to work with those folks. And that is really our first reaction is, if you're willing and trying to come to compliance, we're going to make that as easy and as acceptable as a path for you. If you're trying to fight compliance, now that's a different discussion. But let's move on. So that's take one. Take two is legal non-conforming, meaning you're coming in, you're of your own volition making adjustments. You're opting into adjusting your property in some way. Happens to be a aspect of that is bringing your property into greater compliance, but maybe you're frustrated with the aspects of that. That's where this exemption that's displayed maybe fits really well. It's like, give us some really good reasons why your particular property, location, how you're lighting it, whatever it is, we can't cover all of our bases with a code that's going to be as small as this. If we want to have a 500 volume dark sky code, maybe we could cover every instance, obviously. But this would give us really good standards for that. And then even within that, usually if you're opting into it, we're going to be a little less when it's a financial component. I'm like, well, you obviously have the money that you're voluntarily making these.
Mm-hmm. So
we prefer your money goes towards fixing your property towards compliance before you start doing the amendments that are more elective, put it that way. So we may be a little bit more restrictive on that aspect, or the planning commission, because you are really ultimately the deciders on this. You may be more restrictive on that component. Now let's go to the third piece, which is amortization. Down the line, we've engaged in that, and this hits somebody kind of out of nowhere, and they're, again, maybe a person without means and they're not capable, but it's immediate terminations, amortization. Again, that's back to compliance, but then through compliance, we're actually now working them back through this exceptions system, which would, through these criteria, their exception could be I need more time or I need an adjustment to the amortization date. So that may be the exception they're actually looking for. They're not looking for a lighting exception. They're just looking for a timing exception. That could be granted by the commission because that's an aspect of our code. So they could do all these things. And then particular to, like you said, even of means to meet the criteria, the way that we phrase that is an analysis of the exception request signed by a qualifying lighting technician, lighting architect, lighting engineer, lighting specialist, or lighting professional. And we kept that lighting professional loose, meaning you just have to kind of know what you're doing. You can't just be a third party, a neutral third party that can verify what is being requested is legit. All of that depending on the topic of the request. So even that sign off, that acknowledged signature isn't a steadfast requirement to even get to planning commission. They can submit something without that element, and then it'd be up to the planning commission whether, well, you didn't really meet our criteria, or you're not meeting our criteria to the full extent, but maybe here's why. So you could either say that's not sufficient, we're going to deny your request. It is sufficient, and not only that, but it's a good request, we're going to approve that. So that's the contingency breakdown we've kind of intentionally left in there. So I feel really good question, super appropriate for what I think is the body of community not here saying, well, how's this going to affect me? That question gets right to that point. And I do want to speak out that, the city administration and leadership has made it quite clear this is an aggressive initiative for a community to really genuinely engage in. I mean, we're deliberately not developing performative code. I think we're all on the same page. We're not about performative code. If we put something in our ordinance, we're gonna enforce it, and we're gonna enforce it the way it's written. But with that, we're accommodating. So it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard for the whole community. But we put in as many aspects to be as reasonable and fair as possible. So that's super good question. I think I've covered it. Hopefully all those aspects.
No, essentially that was the perfect answer. And I understood some of that from a different aspect, but kind of wanted to hear it said and didn't know essentially if we wanted to write something that was specific to dark skies as far as that, like coming into compliance. But even the understanding that the exemption can just be on, or exception can just be for the date of your amortization or compliance. I don't know why I'm having
I struggle with
that word
that.
today.
Yeah.
But anyways, that was what I was looking for.
And we could draft language in. I think what we have, the less language, the better, in my opinion, if it is covered. We could go to a redundant set and put it in there specifically about time frame, but then I think that becomes an entirely different process and review capacity. So I could be on the fence. I could be convinced either way. I think what we have
essentially
works
just
for it, though.
ensuring that we have a process that is not like means prohibitive in and of itself, that allows people to, if they are blindsided by this, come into compliance without major struggles and violations is what I wanted to be sure of.
And I think it's still worth, even if people are notified and have 6 years, it doesn't necessarily mean that makes it accessible to them to kind of put money aside for these upgrades in a 6-year period. So I still think it would be worth exploring potentially what grants are out there, where we could kind of make like an income qualified grant fund pool to help like lower income or struggling families, or those who have like very severe cases of non-compliance where it would be requiring major overhauls that would be pretty cost prohibitive, to support them and all kind of like work together towards the compliance.
Thanks for bringing that up, Miles.
Yeah.
And then, one of our public comments from Caitlin talking about just sort of lighting and concern for people with disabilities and seniors and folks who really do need proper illumination I would say that's everybody, honestly, but I think it's more of an acute issue. Certainly if you struggle with vision problems or mobility issues. I think we talk about this a lot every time we've talked about this ordinance, but it's worth, reiterating that I almost wish this was called like the smart lighting ordinance or like the good lighting ordinance, because I do think it's it is taking the past of how lights were done, which was cheaply and easily and just sort of what was available, transitioning us into knowing a lot more about just how light travels and where it goes and what happens with it and what kind of illumination is needed for what sort of uses. And I think the end hope is not even the end hope. I would think it's safe to say, like, factually, the result of this will be that lighting is better in places that should be lit, and not places that shouldn't, sort of not wasted, better illuminated. It's hard because I think there is a lot of justifiable confusion in the community, especially when it's been years and years now that this has been on the books. People don't realize that we have not hit the amortization ceiling yet. And most lights in towns are still not compliant. And I think there's a lot of confusion about bad lighting having to do with this ordinance, specifically when it's just bad lighting that was going to be replaced at some point. Street lights flickering out on Main, just weird kind of stuff like that. Honestly, bad lights that in the course of this ordinance, I think give some, what is the word I'm looking for? Some sort of honestly incentive on the city to sort of come into that better directed illumination as well. So, but yeah, I think absolutely. I think there's nothing in this ordinance that would stop a frequented path from having really nice lighting, around the Grand Center or at the Care Center or, the MAPS building or anywhere, the hospital. I mean, there's nothing here. And if anything, I think it'll hopefully help make it really clear where those like safe paths are through town.
And to add to that, this ordinance actually requires that. It before, where there was no requirement really, this
that's a
actually
good point.
is illuminating areas that weren't previously that should have been. I think you said that it's illuminating well. And so Moab outdoor lighting ordinance that we have currently is kind of our name of the ordinance. It's certainly moved away from what the flagship was, which is dark sky, but I think that is confusing to people. Dark sky confusing with dark ground, both for people that want that and also people that are really worried about that. This is outdoor lighting and doing the lighting that we need and doing it correctly. But I think very good points in that.
But that's absolutely something, and all that to say that like that is something that's really worth spreading the word about in the community, that if there are non-functioning streetlights or streetlights that are bad or things that aren't working or businesses that need better illumination for safety, that those are all things that like can and should be fixed, and if anything need to be fixed now under this ordinance. So awesome. Thank you all the staff for all of your hard work on this. Many iterations of staff, but I think our present folks in the room have done a ton of work on this, so thank you. Anything else from folks before we maybe take a vote?
I think staff wants to circle back on one item for direction prior to us concluding, but I'd love to get any comments about the broader ordinance now that you've seen both the true red line and the clean draft. Anything else outside of twinkle lights? That's what we're coming back to. Okay.
Lights it is.
Twinkle lights it is. Let me pull up the.
Wait. I have feelings, guys.
Okay. So we're circling back now to holiday lights. This was a comment brought up by Alexi in our active review. So once this was posted, this current draft, I had a number of staff from the building to compliance, sustainability. I had everyone really take a good look at it, and not many of them had a good turnaround time, but I did get to meet with Alexi and Richard earlier today. And one of those aspects for holiday lighting in particular was that idea of twinkle lights. A lot of people's maybe icicle lights or things that have kind of this intermittent aspect. They're flashing, for lack of a better word. Right now we have this drafted that, like we talked about, lighting for these holiday lights after 10 p.m. Would be prohibited. They can have it, but up until 10 p.m. Twinkle lights is that really kind of soft gray area where maybe in the community this is something that we really want to analyze, but historically that's a lot of people's lights do that for especially our winter holiday season. They, whether it's tree lights, house lights, whatever it is, they have a twinkle effect. So the way it's written now, it'd be prohibited after 10. Is that something that we're concerned is inappropriate for what has been a historic lighting element? I think what we found is I get that there's maybe an appropriate threshold for a soft twinkle light, for lack of a better word, on houses or something like that. But the ability to mitigate between the difference of that and something that is inappropriate gets really challenging. Again, that middle ground gets really hard. So it's just much easier to say collectively as a whole, we believe that flashing, blinking, strobe, fade, or glare, just it can't be acceptably done as a whole after 10 p.m. So again, getting back into the feather signs, I keep using that as an example. I think with this, when it comes to twinkle stuff or anything like that, it's either we're in or we're out. But regulating it somewhere in the middle is not going to work for us at staff level. So I don't need to keep us here all night at it. It wasn't in the original draft. This is the way we have drafted it. We've maintained that.
Doesn't say twinkle.
It
so-
doesn't say twinkle. It
The
would
lawyer brain going off here doesn't say twinkle.
it would
so-
categorize, I think, as a blinker flash. I think we're
I don't know. I think that's up to judicial interpretation.
That's-
Lori.
that is, as I'm learning,
Point, yeah.
language is really interesting. Tomato, tomato. So
Or on Christmas that they've told us about.
it's good.
Sorry,
coming.
I could not help it. I'm
Um,
sorry.
So we can add twinkle if you want. I think on the record, it'd be nice to get direction on this, that this
Yeah.
is indeed the desire of the commission to move forward this way.
I think that's so tough. Because there is such a broad array of things. Just thinking about, Christmas lighting, for example. There are
Mhm.
there are strobe, there are projector, there are all sorts of stuff that yes,
Mhm.
after 10 p.m. it would be really great to not have those on
Mhm.
for a variety of reasons.
Mhm.
And then there are like you said, the soft fade, the icicles, the
Mhm.
sort of little
Mhm.
kind of
Almost
nice.
candle-like.
soft. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, exactly. And,
Yep.
and it certainly seems like the intent of this is to capture all of that as things.
That I think we did draw the line in the sand
Yeah.
there. Even though some of those things might be appropriate, the
Yeah.
bigger majority and what would be a consequence of the people taking to the extreme, it'd be, I think, more appropriate to capture it all than permit everything.
Hmm.
I think by nature of how this kind of thing is going to be enforced, as we discussed earlier, there's no code enforcement officer that's going to be rolling around at 11 p.m. making sure no one has any twinkle lights on. I think that will help capture, I guess, the essence of what we're trying to do here, which is if you cover your house like so many of the holiday movies with, umpteen million icicle lights, that could be understandably aggravating for your neighbors. But if you have just a few of them and it's barely noticeable over the other ambient lighting that's there, I doubt anybody's going to reach out and complain about you. And so at the end of the day, I think leaving it as is and as written, they should be off at 10 will cover most things. And if someone chooses to have a bunch of twinkle lights that are enough of a nuisance that their neighbors call in about them, I don't really love the idea of any of this being used as a way to police our neighbors. But with that being said, I think it's easier to say no twinkle lights after 10 than it is to find someone who makes the judgment call on how much twinkle your lights can have.
That's a silly phrase, but that's exactly it. I mean, you couldn't have been more
Phrased it that way because it felt silly
eloquent
and
that
I
way.
kind of wanted to
I mean, that you nailed it though.
Cool. The things that we talk about in the planning.
some of these are ambient enough, but I think
Yeah.
it's easier to just say no. And
Mhm.
if you go about it in a way that becomes a nuisance, you will be shut down. But otherwise, if it's not a nuisance and you have one string of icicle lights, I don't think anyone's going to. do
Can we
this.
write in that from October 15th through the end date on this, that code enforcement must wear a Grinch costume when
Yes.
when following up on any sort of holiday lighting?
I'll
Go-
pass
go-
that on to the sergeant, for the PD. I'll make that recommendation
I
to
mean,
them.
quite honestly, it could be a funny post.
We already have Officer Theodore out there.
Yeah.
So this wouldn't be a far cry from something that would be acceptable.
I mean, for educational purposes it would be on Facebook, like, we're not trying to be a Grinch, but here's some new things that you
That's
should be
pretty fun.
aware
I'll throw that past the sergeant.
of.
Says qualifying,
Yes,
temporary outdoor lighting.
yes, thank you.
Define qualifying. Is it?
Yep, no,
somewhere
you
else?
you nailed it. We use the same qualifying term with safety lighting as well.
Mhm.
If we're back up in the definitions, that qualifying means, it would have to fall under this threshold, or excuse me, this threshold. Meaning, the zoning administrator has discretionary review of what that includes or does not include, because what we would have people saying is, well, I believe I meet this standard. It's like, well, you're not the zoning administrator. Your interpretation isn't the authority. So qualifying gives us that. We're qualifying it as yes, it contributes, or no, that is not qualifying. So you're arguing.
Yeah.
At which point, if they contest that interpretation, that's an appeal process.
Okay.
So that's a legal aspect we've added to kick in appeals.
Okay.
In a clean way that we never love getting appeals or appeals of interpretations or decisions, but I'd far rather people know how to do that by saying, well, you're just being unfair. It's like, no, this is qualifying. Here's our standard. So you can also participate in that understanding.
That makes
But yeah,
sense.
thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah,
That
thanks,
is,
Mikhail.
but for safety line, it's the same thing. We added qualifying as an important aspect of that. Scroll back down there. So
Your
you can see it.
safety strobe light cannot be, is it qualifying?
That's right. Yeah, so we're down here.
Yeah, I think that makes, I think this is one of those, there's no black and white with it, but I think the balance of the potential harms, I think, rests stronger with not having the provision we've been discussing in there,
Mhm.
for the overall purposes of the ordinance. I think it would be a pretty broad inconsistency and a sort of undermining of the sort of intent of everything to not have something in there this way versus the balance of the harms as far as over enforcement of something like this. And if that does end up happening, there is nothing to stop council from amending that as
That's
well,
right.
based on sort of the reality of things either.
That is something, as we're drafting many ordinance groups right now.
Yeah.
Is there's always going to be aspects of the code that we wish we had built up further or that were
Mhm.
just flat missed. It's a lot to review. Fortunately, in this next year, we are doing our municipal code rewrite, which will open everything back up and
Yeah.
give us a chance, even with, because this update is an update of a prior existing
Yeah.
code that we're doing exactly that. We're updating
Yep.
aspects that we realized, ooh, these pieces don't work. So in the next year, with any of even these amendments, we're finding, ooh, this is inadequate, or we didn't mean it to be phrased this way. We won't have to necessarily levy in the direction from that big lift to say, city council, can we go back and do this
Mhm.
again? Which is hard to get that direction. We're already gonna be opening it up, so it'll be
Great.
second opportunity in case there is anything we're uncertain about.
Anything else from other commissioners?
I still have a little bit of beef about this line that says roadway and streetlights are prohibited unless recommended by the engineer or UDOT.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's one guy and one entity that says whether the road needs some lighting on it or not. Like, I don't know.
And that,
We're just-
yeah, no, that's a good point that was brought up.
I'm one of those people who
Find that
does not
section.
see super,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when it's dark outside and you're trying to drive, and most of the streets in Moab don't have the reflective center line paint
Mm-hmm.
anymore. Those are like long gone.
As I'm pulling it up, yeah, the purpose behind that specifically, and again, that was existing language. we took out some of the qualifying aspects of that. That was already, it's in there currently. But the idea with that is right of way, that is ours. So we don't want private property owners putting light posts on their private residential properties, arguing, I'm illuminating your street. It's like, we have calculations, we have jurisdiction over this, and we're obligated to illuminate it to a very specific standard, or UDOT, if it's not our jurisdiction, is required to lead to their standards. That's why those two entities are the governing bodies. That's like saying somebody else has permission to light your property because they feel your property is too dark. That drifts a little bit into private streets, which is a little bit of an odd territory where it's not right of way per se. It's not city property, but it is a roadway or streets. That means the city engineer will be requiring, which we do currently, is illumination pass through those. So if it were a private development with homes, we would be the ones regulating how much light, or if the light's placed in certain ways on that street and roadway.
Is that new? Was that always that way?
Since 2019.
Okay,
We
pretty recent then. Okay, because my old neighborhood
Your
was,
through PUDs, yeah.
yeah,
And they may not have required it.
yeah,
The circulation, and it's data based. It's not, hey, I think this should be it.
Yeah.
The engineers have certain traffic calculations, traffic impact studies, that if certain things meet a certain capacity, they're then required by standards that they're held to. And this is why we got this question earlier about the building official. I can't remember. I think it was Carolyn, your comment about, should we follow the IRC, not just the building official? Why are we giving a person versus the code? And the idea is the code's always changing.
Mhm.
And even so, which edition, which language, so putting it to who is the interpreting authority is actually a more succinct version for our municipalists to carry through. But that's another very good question and observation.
I'm thinking like in subdivisions.
Yeah, some, but depending on their traffic volume, wouldn't be required to have lighting. And if they do, we would require that it's meeting our standards.
Neighbors in the subdivision got together and said, this is, right where these two streets hit is really dangerous. We want a light.
Mhm.
And the city engineer says, well, the calculations aren't there. And it's clearly not a UDOT thing, then it's prohibited and they can't have it.
That we think may be amending the approach anyway. They would currently come to the city engineers. We have that going on currently. Part of the problem is those aren't our lights. That was Rocky Mountain Power's lights. So it's us, it's our road, not our lights. There's a lot of entities and jurisdictions involved in this. So when people complain about lighting, we're like, hey, we hear you. That's Rocky Mountain Power. That's why your light is not changed. It's not us, but it is our road.
So there's some ways to.
Yeah, we've had people come say, hey, we need more light here. So we've done the evaluation. We've done it with the engineer and with Rocky Mountain Power, and we've had lights installed. We've also had lights removed where it's excess light and it's not necessary.
Interesting.
That makes me feel
But the engineer is looking at revamping that system to make it more accessible, more reviewable. And it's basically, I don't know if this would qualify perfectly, but a right-of-way use permit.
so.
So that or process, most of the time that's like an E&E permit. So when you go to construction to kind of have streets, make sure that you're utilizing the right of way appropriately when you're building. That's the only system we have so far, which isn't great. So the engineer's looking at expanding that say you want to readjust parking and the parking alignments. This would be a system that actually allows you to petition that. We can review it, go through a full process that isn't just this permit. It's a process. So we're going to refine that, I think, in the future a little bit better. But for the moment, there's a way. It's just not a perfectly described process. Yeah.
I rescind my beef.
Okay.
Let the record reflect beef rescinded.
Okay.
Yeah, again, I mean, it's so tough. We try to pass the most perfect thing we possibly can, and then there's inevitably always going to be just real world considerations and application that like nobody figured out. So,
Which we've been building contingencies for, which I
Yeah.
love, because that doesn't paint
Yes.
us into a corner. is
Yes.
We have
I will
wiggle
say,
room that is totally legal and standardized. And so that catch-all, I'm really so proud of the commission for supporting and developing these, both for the landscape ordinance with this ordinance. And then kind of what was started through this was the AEH, was kind of the generation of, well, let's set all these additional contingencies. And we expanded on that with landscaping in a review fashion. I think that's what we're seeing here.
Mhm. All right. So, as usual, we have,
Did we close? the
we
hearing?
did.
Okay.
We did. Where is the? There it is. As usual, we have a potential proposed resolution. I think, do we?
We should have an ordinance.
I didn't see a
Recommendation.
proposal.
Yeah, there's not
Oh,
actually a
it did
proposed
get missed in
resolution.
this one.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. It's because we've been basing it off workshop. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
To fill us in, I apologize for that not being in the packet. It would be our standard recommendation, recommend with modifications table with findings for staff or negative recommendation. And it will be a recommendation of ordinance 2023-14. And I think it's appropriate to recommend the draft clean and red line in your packet. There are the amendments that we spoke about. We'll categorize those for council as Plan Commission approved this. We did discuss these elements and staff is recommending them. That way it's not too cumbersome to capture all these elements that you really haven't had time to review beyond this review, unless you want to say, including the aspects reviewed during tonight's meeting, and we'll capture it that way because it's written, it's a working draft, but whatever you'd like to do. So sorry about that.
That's all right. We have to think for ourselves.
No pressure.
Speaking of that, would anybody else with a functional brain tonight care to try to put a motion together? I do not feel
And
that
is
I'm that
it-
person.
Is it possible to make a motion to recommend with like the suggestion that staff investigate the viability of like putting together some sort of funding pool to support people coming into compliance? What would that look like?
Yeah, the answer is yes, you can make that recommendation. To what ends, I don't think we'll have findings prepared for council off of the recommendation, sorry. So that recommendation would advance to council, but they say, well, have you found those findings yet? I think the answer would be no. I mean, we can begin exploring that, but we've, I think, already been looking into that with sustainability as far as potential opportunities. Right. Right. So the answer is yes. I just don't know if we'll have the findings by the time this is going through, which will be,
Findings like identified possible.
yeah. So
streams
if
or-
you recommend that we start that process of the research and deliverables, I think we can begin that. I think that is less of the ordinance itself and more of an initiative following this ordinance.
Yeah, that's why I wasn't sure if it was.
So,
what fits
but
you.
the way you phrased it, that would be a functioning recommendation. I just don't know about how we deliver on that in relation to this ordinance. Other than that, I think can be a directive given from city council following this ordinance approval is
Mhm.
now over the next 6 years, go out, generate these options, generate these opportunities and report back. But that would need to come from council as a directive initiative outside of this ordinance.
So does it make the most sense to like ask Luke to pass it on to council as opposed to like putting
I think
that
it
in our motion
Actually,
or?
that could be a clean way to actually do that. Either way, it can be on the record within the recommendation, which is fine. And that corresponds the same way. Luke will probably still say the same thing. Just when I respond to council, I'll say, it's recommended that we do this. That'll take your authorization and direction, which isn't a bad way either. It's up to you.
I don't know, you're the-
100% up to you.
You're the expert here.
Let's include it in the motion.
Oh, Luke was gonna say something.
I think from my perspective,
This is Luke.
oh yeah,
Sorry.
Luke Wojciechowski, city council member, or I think from my perspective, potentially having it be part of a more formalized thing where it's an actual request by the commission that they voted on, rather than me just saying, hey, the commission said they really like this. I think there's a little bit more weight to it, if it is kind of like an official position of the commission.
Thank you, Luke.
Yeah, I don't know how others feel about it.
I mean, that was something I was interested in the first time we discussed all this, was providing as much support as we can for people trying to come into compliance.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to support something like that.
I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, hopefully this doesn't overburden staff in the interim to just sort of start having these conversations and at least potentially have a framework to discuss with council.
No, and I think that's why the recommendation does give it some structure. But what that comes down to is order of operations, which is something we're kind of refining out right now, is administration runs staff who's given the direction from council. So we're kind of skipping a step there. So I want to make sure that our direction is formalized by council, but then given through administration to staff to conduct. So my supervisors are giving me that directive. It can't come from council technically directly. Does that make
Can we
sense?
say like, Carly, we would like.
Yeah, that's getting closer. But and that's why I was kind of pondering over this. I think the recommendation as originally proposed actually meets the greater desire because it'll be on the record, it's formalized, it's structured, even if it's not a deliverable upon this, it's been articulated that way. Which is not a recommendation that has to be resolved by the time of
Yeah,
adoption.
it's
That's
not a
the main piece.
condition.
It's that we're recommending this in that staff can continue to go forward and do that. And I think that's acceptable for sure.
All right, Carolyn. Let's hear
I think we might need a group workshop.
it.
We got
Okay, so we're going for positive recommendation to city council. And it's not a modification, it's just with the additional recommendation.
Yep.
That we don't want to say that staff begin to explore, we want to say that council directs administration.
I think we could say that staff explores this. I think that's, cutting to the main point. It's how we'll get there. But I think that's appropriate. Michael isn't here, our community development director. This is where he would have been he's our bridge. So he would have been a really nice, staff person that I think developed this succinctly. So I think he may not be watching right now, but anyway, I think the way we're framing it is, I feel it meets our statutory requirements and what we need to do.
Okay, to explore options to reduce cost burden on residents and business owners, or was the residents would cover both?
I think residents.
Can you repeat that one more time? I know that was stringing it together, but positive recommendation CC with additional recommendation to explore options for cost.
Yeah, I wrote that with additional recommendation that staff explores options to reduce cost burden on residents for coming into compliance.
Yeah.
This is good.
Got it.
That work?
Yes.
Lawyer thumbs up?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yep.
It's a low bar, I will say, from me.
Don't take this from.
Was that a motion or was that you putting together the motion?
Let's read it once
Yeah.
through formally. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to sound confident. when
Do
I say
it.
Okay, I'll move to make a positive recommendation to city council. To adopt the ordinance number 2019-03.
We'll do 2023-14. Sorry, that was the original ordinance.
It's like, what are you looking at, girl?
All over the place. Okay, start over.
confused.
I'll move to make a positive recommendation to city council to adopt ordinance 2023-14. with
Yep.
the additional recommendation that staff explore options to reduce cost burden on residents for coming into compliance.
All right, we have a motion on the floor from Carolyn. Thank you. Very nice job. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right. I'm sort of like looking pointedly at people.
Yeah.
I'll turn left next time. All right, any other discussion before we take a vote? All right,
Roll call vote.
sure.
Okay. Mikkel?
Aye.
Kaya?
Aye.
Miles?
Aye.
Carolyn?
All right, motion passes unanimously, with the added recommendation. Thank you to all involved once again. Woohoo. All right. Our next item, could I request that we take a brief recess? Just for being human,
5 minute.
Yeah.
Human recess.
human recess.
Sounds good.
All right. We are still on the record though, and we are still recording.
Yep.
So once again, don't say dumb stuff. What happens when I don't drink water all day? And then I drink all the water?
All the water right at the end. Yeah.
I really want to ask a question, but I don't want to do it over.
I know. Right.
Can I label it as a really dumb question and ask it? Or should I just? Sure. Okay. If TOT taxes, the portion of them that go toward mitigation of things of tourists. For lack of a better phrase. And we include that with our skies ordinance. There is a line in there about it promoting tourism. Then is it possible that maybe some TOT funds could get shoved towards dark skies?
I think that's valid. Based on my previous understanding of what has been allocated so far, use very similar justifications.
Okay.
So that is something that could be an untapped resource. It's pretty over allocated already. I think both can consider it because of that justification process. It's- they're probably- But this becomes that priority that council wants it to be.
Is
That
that how we
carves
get
out.
downtown?
So I think that's, I think prior to us. With determination.
Surprising.
It's viable, whether you choose.
You have a furry friend at home?
I do. Yes.
You have just like
That's-
shed little beard pieces all over your
No,
laptop case?
Okay.
Yes. Have a couple dogs at home.
Thank you for
So,
entertaining my
yeah.
dumb question.
It's especially the white one is a challenge to keep her
Okay,
hair
question.
from
That
showing
was-
up.
You're good at smart questions. I want to hear what the dumb
Fine,
question
though.
was.
He
I bet
makes
it
up
wasn't
for
dumb.
being incredibly smart.
Nice. You tell her.
Oh my gosh.
As long as you're.
Long week. Okay, everybody ready? Wonderful. Let's move along. All right, we are back. We are on to our next action item, 5.1, consideration of adoption of resolution 28, 2023, a resolution to adopt the 2023 Sustainability Action Plan. This is again a briefing and possible action, and it appears Alexi is here to give us a presentation. Yeah, let me pull up my screen.
Okay, thank you for the time. Although the plan is, the sustainability plan is not complete like some of the others you reviewed. The current council would like to see action this year. So I'm going to present the background and an outline of the plan and what we have so far. I welcome questions, feedback, anything you have will make the plan better as we go. We plan to have the review draft on November 20th. Otherwise, I will also share any feedback that I get this evening with Brendel Group, our consultants who have been helping us put this plan together. All right, so the sustainability plan came out of a desire to build on Moab's progress with sustainability so far, previous accomplishments, unifying our priorities, developing goals and strategies that we can act upon, engaging the community for ideas to build stronger efforts, and to develop immediate next steps, which in this plan will take the form of 6 of the strategies being formed into implementation plans that will be able to start moving as soon as the plan is complete and adopted. Okay, so the effort started in March. And since then we've met with the project management team once and surveyed them on the top strategies. I've met with the technical advisory team 3 times. We did a workshop with City Council. Another one will be happening this month. In addition to an update this month. And the goal is the full draft, as I said, on November 20th, that would be available for public comment. We would be able to incorporate revisions into a final version that the council could consider on December 12th. So these are the components of the plan. From broad at the top to getting more specific at the bottom. The vision sets the stage for the plan and helps guide where it should go. The cross-cutting themes and the topics help define the scope and the focus of the plan. And the goals, strategies, and metrics try to get to specifically what we want to accomplish and how we want to get there and how to measure it. So starting with the vision statement, this was developed through input from the Technical Advisory Committee, a council workshop, and community survey. It was split into a vision with an active lean, trying to get at Moab's drives to become thriving, resilient, equitable, and inclusive. The idea being that like this is an action. And then also trying to lean into a high quality of life and an economy and an environment that can support that. The other piece was the purpose, which is a little bit more about what we're doing and how we're going to do it, and focusing on the transparency of the process and trying to involve the community in the process. Okay, so the next piece would be the cross-cutting considerations. These were issues important no matter what topics we were talking about. They needed to be throughout any focus area of environmental sustainability that we were addressing. So any of the strategies or solutions need to encompass and consider the well-being of the community, economics, social equity and inclusion, the effects that the solutions or strategies might have on the environment, what the impact is of the plan, and also specifically the effects on locals. Okay, zooming in a little bit more, the specific focus areas that we requested, and they've been shuffled around a little bit as we tried to figure out which buckets things fall into, because a lot of environmental concerns can affect more than one area at the same time. So these are sustainability areas that each have strategies within them as we keep going. Ecosystems and water are especially tied to natural systems. Energy, buildings, transportation have a large greenhouse gas impact. Land use and planning affects a lot of these things, but in a more long-term way. And materials management has a lot of life cycle costs, both on the front end and on natural systems on the back end, like after we're done with things. And of course, the crossover of the cross-cutting considerations, trying to keep those in mind as we develop solutions for these. And then there is some crossover between them. So some of these things affect more than one area, but we just put them in the place that they seem to make the most sense based on the feedback we'd received so far. Okay, so the next piece is actual goals that are in each of these areas. So we started with some of the goals that Moab already had. For example, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2040 and a 50% reduction by 2032. So trying to pull in some of these greenhouse gas goals or 100% renewable electricity by 2030. And for reference, I have the most recent greenhouse gas inventory that we have for our area. We have a 2019 one and 2021, and we do it with Grand County because data is better available at that scale for us. I pulled out the interstate traffic here because it blows up transportation to about 67%. And we have no control and it is outside the city. So this includes transportation that is not interstate. And what we're seeing is that the majority of our greenhouse gases are coming out of energy, which would be electricity and natural gas primarily, and residential, commercial, industrial applications, followed by transportation being another big block, solid waste coming after that, and then ag forestry, other land use kind of distant behind that with some, a couple pieces related to where our emissions come from and the process of providing us electricity and things like that. So those are the 1-2% type things and showing up here. So moving on with the process, we use those goals to try to set some big things, but we also tried to involve the community to get an idea of the direction people wanted to see this plan go. We put out a survey with 208 responses and asked people questions about these goals and priorities, trying to get them to choose the things that they would most like to see. So 2 in each category for immediate implementation plans. And the reason we did that is because we knew we were trying to zero in on the 6 that were going to be kind of the first things that we go after out of this plan. I should say that that doesn't mean that we will stop doing things we're already working on or that other things that were not our top 6 strategies will not happen. Some of them are being done by other departments and things like that. We'll get to those later. But this was just of the strategies that we're looking at, what's rising to the top in the community. We also did an open house where we tried to move even further in to try to zero in on those 6 strategies. And then we ended up with something like this. So the information in here, I'm going to go into the specifics so you don't have to, I'm trying to just show you the scope of what happened. And then I'll go into each topic area. So along with the consultant who gave us input on impact, which would be like greenhouse gas impact, for example, they also helped us with trying to get some sort of measure of equity issues that would be addressed or co-benefits to these strategies. And then we also, from the survey and the community event, had some idea of how popular these things were with the community. And also asked the project management team to rate things on cost and staff time and political feasibility to get us a better practicality score. So that's where this came from. It's not necessarily a decision maker by itself, but we were trying to give people context on decisions because it's easy to go after things that personally appeal to us, but they might have a lower impact, or maybe they're not politically feasible at this time. And we didn't want to prioritize those as our top implementation plans if it wasn't actually something we could go after immediately. However, all of these strategies are going to remain in the plan, in the register. They will be there for us to reference as future things we might want to work on. The things that are highlighted are the ones that the Technical Advisory Committee identified as their top priorities for implementation plans. Okay, so I'm going to go into each section to give you an idea of the kinds of things that are in here. In this case, the top 2, expand the urban tree canopy and protect habitat and green space, were identified by the Technical Advisory Committee as both things that they would like to see in the immediate adoption of the implementation. So the expanding urban tree canopies, developing and implementing programs to expand urban tree canopy. This also came up in the parks plan as a priority. And with the help of Richard, we also have a grant to help with this. So it's a pretty good candidate to be at the top. Protect habitat and green space involves trying to protect, enhance habitat and green space that's in town, look for strategies to be able to do that, identify spaces where it might make sense, possibly return pollinator habitat or things like that in places that are good candidates for it. We don't have a plan yet, right? This would start us in a process to try to do that. I think some things in this case, like dark sky community, achieving that status did not rise to the top because we're pretty well already on the way. And having an additional planning session to do that wouldn't make it happen faster. And reducing ambient noise is popular among the community, but it's also a little outside the scope of the sustainability department. Okay, energy and buildings. The one that the TAC identified here was incentives for energy efficiency, renewables, and indoor air quality to try to help people overcome barriers to be able to do these things. Sorry, by highlighting that, I actually erased everything else in that row. It is feasible. We have recently worked on a grant with the Southeastern Utah Association of Local Governments to work on a grant, which we received, that will help expand the kinds of things that are available in the weatherization program. And there's also a team associated with that grant, which will hopefully also help us bring more of that into Grand County to get some of these things available. So it also is a decent candidate to be an implementation plan because we have a little momentum now and we could use a lot more. Some of the other things on this list include Soul Smart certification. Moab is already, I think, at the silver level, a low level on this, and this is just trying to remove barriers to getting solar. Healthy and sustainable building practices. This one we have limited control of due to the jurisdictions of state and local governments in Utah, but there are some things that can be done with like stretch codes and that could be explored further. Energy education, I think, is self-explanatory. Municipal facilities energy audit would be going through our own buildings to look where we as a city could save electricity. I'm going to go ahead and say it explicitly. It does not mean going out and auditing all the buildings in Moab or forcing people to have energy audits. Advocate for state energy codes, I think self-explanatory, and Watt Smart community implementation. It's a plan that Moab had put together in the past. We did try to avoid putting plan implementation or developing new plans in the first strategies because we just completed this whole process. I think it would be underwhelming if the next step is to just do another one as opposed to try to get some things done. Land use and planning, this is our shortest section. People wanted to work on urban agriculture programs, which would probably look at making sure we don't have code issues that are preventing people from doing this. In the landscape code, we did exempt food production. And it would also be looking at potential for collaborations in order to create places where people can grow things. Sustainable development, best practices, performance review. I think some of this is already going on where we're working through like dark sky, landscape, things like that. Reducing industrial air pollution impacts and industrial noise. I think my interpretation of why these ended up as they are in the plan with a lot of support is partly just because people are frustrated with noise in general, and anything that would reduce noise would be positive. We don't actually have a lot of industrial properties in Moab that would be creating lots of pollution and noise. And our air quality, we do have a sensor now, and in general, air quality is pretty good in Moab. Obviously, not all the time, but reasons why this did not rise to the top at this time. Transportation, none of these ended up being on the short list for an implementation strategy, mainly because the things that are moving forward, like developing a multimodal transportation plan, we already have a unified transportation plan that has a lot of multimodal and like pedestrian, bicycle types of strategies in it. So again, we were trying to avoid putting planning as our next plan. And moving on, off-road electric vehicle electrification. This one, I think, is a little bit on the horizon for that to be a real opportunity. And there were also questions about at what point or what role would the city have in doing that? So I think it's a good one to keep on the list and keep in mind, but we're not quite ready for it yet. Green streets policy, which is related to a complete streets policy, looking at connectivity for pedestrians, bicyclists, people on different forms of transportation. Green streets, I think, would add in some like nature-based solutions. Richard already has a grant to work on a complete streets policy, so that's kind of on the way. Meaning, I think this one's coming, just not specifically immediately out of this plan. EV readiness, we are working on it. Again, good thing to keep kind of close at hand. I think we are headed that direction with just having better access to electric vehicle charging. I do get contacted fairly often by people who are looking for that kind of infrastructure in our community. Anti-idling enforcement, we do have an anti-idling policy. Sustainable transportation education, self-explanatory, and fleet.
We do have an anti-idling policy.
Yes, we do. I believe it's 3 minutes. Is that correct? I think
I'll
so.
look it up myself.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
do. And then municipal fleet electrification will be looking at city-owned vehicles for electrification. That one is kind of already on the radar for us. We are halfway through. And then I'm happy to get some of your thoughts on these as well. Organic waste diversion pilot is the one that was identified by the TAC within this category for immediate implementation plans.
It's 5 minutes. I just looked it up.
5 minutes?
It's
Okay,
5
thank
minutes.
you.
Yep. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No, good.
no idling in excess of 5 minutes.
Sweet.
Get plenty of time.
Organic waste diversion, like composting?
Yes, yeah, it would be like composting. It is also possible that there could be some focus on the front end of like food waste reduction. At this point, it's looking like it would just be a pilot to something pretty small scale. That would be what the implementation would focus on, is sort of like that first step. Education campaign is self-explanatory. Construction demolition waste reduction. This would end up being probably some sort of city policy on this if we decide to pursue it in the future. Municipal environmental purchasing policy. This would be an internal policy for the city to look at the kinds of things that we purchase and directing or purchasing the things that would be more sustainable or environmentally friendly. Materials repair and reuse resources. It would just be trying to get things available in the community for people who want to fix stuff instead of buy something new and therefore reduce their consumption. Evaluating the plastic bag ban, looking at the current city code on that, and waste audits and monitoring. And I feel like this one, although the immediate greenhouse gas potential of it is small, eventually it could be bigger because it would just give us information on what we do so we could make decisions in the future. This would all be in collaboration with the Solid Waste Authority because they actually do our waste management. And we did have representatives at our meetings from them. Water conservation plan, this would be implementing strategies that we already have. We should already be doing that. Accessible water on water conditions. I think this is really more out of the water utility resource management plan, rather than specifically out of the sustainability plan. We do plan to reference things that the city has already adopted or other places where you can find these goals, as opposed to trying to recreate them within the sustainability plan. The TAC identified nature-based stormwater solutions is something to pursue immediately. There has already been previous work on this, and there are a lot of people interested. So I think that this has good potential for community involvement. Gray water adoption. This would be incentives to try to encourage people to take advantage of what they're allowed to do with their gray water. And municipal water audits would be internal auditing of city use of water, which we are already trying to move in that direction. I met with the Parks Director today, and we also talked about some of the opportunities for the coming season. So some of these things probably will happen outside of these specific implementation plans. And so these are the final 6 that we got out of the Technical Advisory Committee. Expanding urban tree canopy, urban agriculture programs, habitat and green space, nature-based stormwater solutions, incentives for energy efficiency, and organic waste diversion pilots. And our technical advisory committee during our last meeting went through and put together sheets like this on all of those strategies to try to add some local knowledge into the eventual plans that we will have for each of these. And that's where we are in the process. Our consultants are currently consolidating our local knowledge with the experiences they have with other communities to try to fill these out. So we'll have a place to go from here. The next steps are a council update next week, the draft plan, which we discussed, a council workshop on the 29th, and then council consideration on December 12th. And I'd be happy to answer questions or go back to slides if you have any other information you'd like.
Can you go back to the last one that had the 6 things? Oh,
Yeah.
there's Carolyn.
You were in the photo. Yes, it's on our technical advisory committee. Yeah. I can also go back to the full register if anybody needs that.
Are your consultants gonna talk about, or hopefully your consultants will talk about, because 1 is gonna use water,
Mhm.
2 is gonna use water, 3 is gonna use water, and 6, no, composting facilities use water, like they use a lot of water too, right?
Well, it would be a pilot more like for community use, but you do have to keep it damp, so it's not a
Yeah.
fire hazard. I think some of that
Can
is,
they address like how they're gonna,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
How that conserving water is gonna work with all of these things.
Mhm.
I think that would help,
I will give them that.
everybody better on board if they understood how the water conservation went hand in hand with expanding the tree canopy.
Mhm. Expanding the urban tree canopy, we do, since we did the landscape ordinance, we do have a tree list, meaning we can choose trees that are better adapted to our climate. And one of the major advantages also of the urban tree canopy related to just livability is that it typically reduces urban temperatures by like up to 10 degrees, which could help in other ways of preventing evaporation. But I hear you, and I'll give them the feedback to make sure that when we're thinking about it and outlining the plan that we're taking water conservation into consideration. We don't want to be counter to our other goals.
And so I also know we kind of like ran over gray water use, but I was curious how much of the city irrigation that we do in municipal parks and stuff is gray water.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer
0.
to it, but I don't think.
I would imagine it's 0.
Yeah, I think
So-
it's 0.
I think in a sense, like as far as these different sustainability things that we can work on, I think, it would be great to expand the urban tree canopy, including on city property. But I think making that sustainable means that the city should be making major efforts towards using gray water to irrigate any of the property that it irrigates.
Got a note. Yeah, go ahead.
I think so with that, again, within the categories, there's so many complicated and interchanging elements to this. And it was on one of the original matrices that showed, it was kind of a lower category, but it was efforts for state legislative amendments. So with gray water in particular, there's a number of limiting factors outside of municipal control. Why, a lot of curiosity, why haven't we implemented better systems sooner? The answer is we're not the only one at the table for a lot of that for health and safety purposes. So I think we're bringing our desire to the table there, but to your point, let's continue to add. So even though that wasn't maybe our I can't remember how it was exactly phrased, but advocacy at the state legislative level to advance a lot of these, gray water, I think being one of those adjacent elements that needs that, isn't just because they're not in the top 6 doesn't mean it won't integrate, I think, into other systems. But I think, like you're saying, profiling that as a point of, and just to the same point of make sure all of these things are agreeing to the best of their ability. I think it's a really good point.
And I guess that's a good way to phrase it too, in the sense that like, even though they are not part of the top 6, they are integral to making the top 6 as effective as we can make them.
Mhm.
And, in certain programs like Greywater, like would love to see it more on a residential level, and the education so that like people understand what they can and can't do with their Greywater makes perfect sense as well. But essentially leading by example and doing our best to irrigate with Greywater,
Yes, please.
definitely a good step in the right
Yeah.
direction.
Especially when it's like grass.
Or trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where you can do drip irrigation and you don't even have to spray it. So
Yeah.
a lot of the health concerns are
Absolutely.
significantly lower because you're not atomizing it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you could like drip irrigate trees with, irrigation buried in the soil.
We can investigate possibilities for it, right? Like look where that strategy could be appropriate. And that was also part of the discussion with the parks director too, like the protecting habitat and green space or looking for spots where we might be able to restore pollinator habitat. They don't necessarily use more water and they're not appropriate everywhere. Like we're not going to do it in the middle of the ball fields, but there might be city properties that are great candidates for Greywater or pollinator gardens or other types of.
And there's so many ways these could play as well, like, protecting habitat and green space. Well, you could, create stormwater catchment systems that then irrigate the habitat and green space you're protecting. So you're no longer having to, irrigate it yourself because they're native plants that are pollinator friendly or otherwise, and they're able to be watered just by seasonal, runoff and stuff like that. So I can definitely see that. Essentially, all of this to me feels like very cool. This is definitely what I want to see in the community. I just feel like an understanding of exactly like what change I'm going to see in the next year, like what boots on the ground work is going to be done to achieve these 6 things is something I'm still working to grasp. And I'm sure we are too, because we're speaking with experts and kind of defining that. But
right, like which parts of these things can immediately happen. And I think from my perspective, without us having our final like implementation plans, the ones that I see immediate movement on are expanding urban tree canopy, incentives for energy efficiency. We already have grants for both of those. And organic waste diversion. Mel, the Sustainability Vista, is working with others on trying to conceptualize what a pilot would look like and who it would serve and where it would be located and how it would operate. But yes, the details are still forthcoming.
Yeah.
So essentially, if we forward a positive approval of this in its current state to City Council, we are just approving the idea that we want to pursue these things, but it's hard to like have an approval on something specific when I don't have an understanding of like what specific steps we're going to take to accomplish these goals.
Yes. And I did talk to Corey about this because I knew this was a challenge.
Yeah, if we want to speak to that right now, we knew that we were going to cover this. So what's been included for recommendation is the resolution supporting and adopting what would be the sustainable action plan. The action plan itself is currently under process. And this is again where we're in a pinch point whereas the housing plan, it's been delivered and it's still going to be working through some additional workshop, both with the county and then also with City Council, where we needed this to go through Planning Commission, not through what would be a formal adoption process, meaning public hearing, but we want the Planning Commission's stamp on this to some degree. But because of the adoption timeline and our ability, unless we're willing to have a special meeting on the first week of December, we wouldn't have exposure to this for the timeline, given the oddity of the next 2 months in our meeting lineups. So when Alexi showed our presentations, December is one of our more typical months, I should say, where Planning Commission's on the 12th, we're on the 14th. So we're actually meeting following City Council. So we are missing that opportunity. So it could be an option that we hold a special meeting to see whatever the more complete product is as it's going to City Council for adoption following their workshop. Or if we're at a place now where we're feeling comfortable to recommend the structure, the action plan as it is without the actual metrics and objectives refined out for implementation, that those are the options, but the action of recommendations on the resolution itself, which is to support the adoption of the plan. So yeah, that was that was a nice segue into why this is a little bit odd and how this presentation is kind of coming through without even the consultants, Brendel Group being here to present.
Because it has to be done before the end of the year. for
Yeah.
some reason.
Yep.
Okay.
The city council desires to adopt this plan prior to the end of the year where the new council's term is going to take effect.
Mm-hmm. I think the idea being that this particular version of this plan started in March, but there was a previous version in 2019. I think we've had some council members working on this a long time and they want to see it through.
A few comments and questions. First, I wanted to say, I think it's really impressive, the technical assistance or technical advisory committee that you pulled together. It just showcases such wide-ranging expertise from community members that I think you did a really impressive job gathering all those people and getting all of their input into the plan, and it really shows. And also, I think it's really refreshing to see a sustainability plan. This is kind of my area of work currently and previously, but that isn't really narrowly focused only on greenhouse gas reductions and takes a more holistic look at well-being, environmental, economic, social in the community. And that I think that approach makes it a lot more palatable for community members to participate in the planning process. So I think that's really great to see as well. I had the same reaction as Mikkel about seeing those top 6, and I missed the last workshop of the TAC. So wasn't totally clear on how those 6 emerged or why there were 6 that were selected, but had the same reaction of kind of like, whoa, these first couple seem pretty water heavy, which runs counter to a lot of like assumptions about water conservation goals. So I think like Mikkel suggested, just really clearly wherever you kind of put that list in the plan, having that statement calling out the acknowledgement of what appears to be a little misalignment would be helpful. And also was wondering, could you just tell us or remind us how what the ordering of those 6 was, or how it came to be that, and why there were those 6 called out?
What we did is the big spreadsheet with all the scores and things came together after our last open house, where our consultants updated everything. And then we took it to the technical advisory committee that we had the next day, and we presented 2 sets of options. One was the thing that had risen to the top in each category, like the top in each of the 6 topic areas. And the other was the top 6 strategies of any of them. And when we showed that to our technical advisory committee, we asked them which one they wanted to pursue. And what ended up happening was kind of a augmentation where they swapped some things, and then they cut out the green street / complete streets because it felt like it was already moving forward. So that's why we don't have a transportation one. And that's why we have 2, I think, is it nature-based solutions? And that's how we ended up with those 6.
It was the organic material pilot. It was brought in. That was the only one that was the augmentation from the static plan.
So we have 2 nature and ecosystems, 1 land use and planning, 1 water, 1 energy and buildings, and then they brought in the materials management one that was the organic waste diversion, which if you saw in the spreadsheet, that one was significantly down on the score sheet, but it did score very highly with the community. And it also was the top strategy in the materials management category. It's just that the top strategy there had lower impact because waste strategies generally have lower greenhouse gas impact. However, our community felt like that was something they really wanted to pursue now.
And with that order, thanks for the explanation. With that order of the implementation strategies, is it presumed to be kind of like a ranking of importance where the number 1 spot will get more resources dedicated to it or anything like that?
No, like on the final slide where I had the 6, that ordering was not intended to be a priority ordering. It's just that there are 6 of them. The actual order they'll be implemented in will probably depend on our opportunities to do it, because we do have we have limited staff, but we also have some of these things that are becoming open right now, you know, with grant deadlines and things like that. So I think some of them will just be determined on the opportunities we have and the staffing that we have to work on them.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be, maybe it's like a nitpicky thing for seeing things in plans, but I think at least for myself, when I see numbers put next to things, you assume that it's a ranked
Like a
order.
priority. Mhm.
Yeah, so if that's not the case, maybe just having regular bullets or like putting them all in the same row or something like that would help to avoid that impression.
Okay.
And I also think, you know, how when you walked us through all of the slides that had the different little emojis, like indicating who voted on what or where it rose to the top, a lot of them you explained were kind of taken off the list for consideration for implementation strategies because there's already work underway, like the existing transportation master plan and other things that you're like, oh, we don't need to call this out to begin trying to work on because the work is already happening. I think making sure that that comes through in the plan for transparency and to help people understand, so they're not seeing it as a priority that really arose in the community survey that then doesn't make the cut to the final list or something like that, would be really helpful too.
I think that's good feedback, and I will pass it on, and also we will try to link to those other plans so people can see where these are actually, like, where their home is, because sustainability is a little bit of everything, you know, it's kind of everywhere. So thank you for that.
I think that sentiment was also vocalized during that final TAC too. The people had that same impression of like, well, we spent all this time and we dedicated our rankings to that, and it feels like we're kind of being, those are being removed, but they're not being removed. They're being put off this list so we can maximize what our highlights are, given they're already in place. But I'm glad you're bringing it up now, because that was a shared observation from the people in the TAC as well.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
I really like, for once, there's a whole emoji or whatever you call it, that says local benefit, local first approach. That's for the people that live here, that we're not doing this for visitors and tourists, that it's for the people. So I appreciate that. I like that a lot.
Thank you. That was a strong sentiment, I think, from our survey and from our technical advisory. So I appreciate
It's really
that.
nice to
Thank
know
you.
that something's being done specifically for the people that live here and that you're acknowledging that. It's appreciated.
All right. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Are we feeling uncomfortable about voting on something that's not complete? Okay with that.
Part of me understands the sentiment of wanting to get this done by the end of the year. Part of me would be willing to come to a special meeting to get it done. Sustainability is very important to me personally. That being said, I would feel more comfortable voting on something if I understood, like, the priority of those top 6 that we're going through and how we actually intend to address each one, rather than, I mean, like, I love the sentiment, and in a way I'm happy to be supportive of the sentiment of this. Like, this approach to sustainability is fantastic, and like you said, it has a nod to being something for the locals and that kind of thing, and all of that I appreciate. I'm just very curious as to how it will actually be implemented, and as far as like my support, I would be much more eager if I understood a little bit more of like a concrete.
What's the timeline on this as far as our positive recommendation and council's ability to get it on there? So if we were to, for example, table this until our next meeting, giving people a little bit more time to ponder, giving staff a little bit more time to potentially flesh things out a little bit, would we still be on schedule to sort of have that completed by the end of the year at this point?
We would not.
Yeah.
what this would require is a special meeting held, given the holiday formatting. And of course, it's up to the commission and staff's ability to accommodate that, outside, of course, the holidays itself. But between now and then, but we also have to factor that the consulting group and staff have to actually get those products in line. So their noticing period for the 14th of December, or excuse me, 12th of December will be December 7th. So meaning December 7th, all those materials will be in a final category for adoption, meaning that would be conveniently the first Thursday of December. So if we would want to hold a special planning commission meeting to review that, we could table this item towards the intent of hosting that special meeting on December 7th.
That will be the 7th.
That Thursday. So the materials, it wouldn't change anything for the consulting groups or staff necessarily, except that we would be having this additional meeting to advance that recommendation on that date. So if that date works for the commission for quorum, I believe staff could accommodate that. I don't think there's any interference that I see right now. So the action would be to table until a scheduled special meeting.
So my question would be, I guess, sort of reiterating the initial question, would we be uncomfortable with forwarding a positive recommendation as it stands now, understanding sort of the framework of where everything is? I guess maybe my question is, what would be the detriment or the downside to going ahead and making a motion on it this evening, given that it is an action plan, it's not an ordinance, it's sort of like what you said, the sentiment. I'm wondering what the downside to that might be, other than it just not being factually as tied up in a pretty little bow as maybe it would be with a bit more time. Functionally, would that change anything, I guess, from others' perspectives? If anyone has any thoughts on that, because I feel like that, I think that for
Definitely
me.
don't want to slow the process. I definitely want
And
to
like
keep
I
it
said,
moving.
I appreciate the sentiment. So I'm not entirely uncomfortable with a recommendation tonight.
But it's hard to put your stamp on something when you don't know exactly what's inside the package and how that might change down the road. And you already said yes.
Yes.
So, but I think this is all coming from the best place and going in the best direction.
Yeah, I personally feel comfortable making a positive recommendation, and I'm also unavailable on December 7th, but
And I think that is a consideration. I think I will say, it seems like, Carolyn has been a part of the process of this a lot more. I understand your perspective on it. Honestly, I trust your judgment on that as well, because you have been more part of this than the rest of us have. And so I think, there's nothing in here that has given me alarm in any way that I would feel like, oh no, we can't have that in there. We have to amend it. And if I did, I might make a recommended motion with that amendment. The full completion of it being like tied up in a pretty little package, I'm less concerned about procedurally, because I don't know that it's functionally changing the content. If I'm wrong, someone please correct me, but that is what my understanding is. And I think that said, it's not just to get it done by the end of the year. It's just because I don't think there's any more substantive change that's needed to the degree that we would want to reiterate this at another meeting, especially a special meeting, especially this time of year. I think to be respectful of the public too, honestly. So
what are the pieces that'll kind of change between now and when it goes in front of council for final consideration?
Well, the text will be written, and the plans, the implementation plans will be fleshed out. Like we looked at the sort of poster version of those will actually be something that we could follow. Other than that, I don't expect substantial changes. I'm trying to think of, there will also as it goes into it, right, there will be specific tables and things like that that are developed in conjunction with this. However, at this time, I don't expect anything major to change within the plan.
Yeah, it would be cool to see the fleshed out
Yeah.
implementation plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a way, I'm not uncomfortable with making a positive recommendation now, but I am curious to see what those implementation plans will be and if that, changes the way we're gonna approach it. So I was also just trying to get a read off you guys to see how you felt about it as well.
With that, if I might, from a staff perspective. So I think listening, because again, this is really your decision and we'll facilitate it. But what it sounds like is the main body, I think the commission seems pretty, not only comfortable, but supportive with the main body, meaning those 6. That was really the substantive element that we were looking at tonight. It's the implementation aspects and procedural elements. So if the recommendation now of the plan body or the framework is acceptable, you could make that positive recommendation on that. But then as this continues to develop, you have the capacities to still attend that work session for the plan or city council and then the adoption meeting itself and speak to that item, either in written testimony is my likely guess. I don't know if we're gonna have public. You would have to form your opinion as a public person, not as a commissioner, but you'd still have the opportunity to come up and, or not maybe come up, but to write your testimony. And if at that point any recommendations were saying, I'm submitting my testimony to the council that this element needs amendment, or I see this, or I'm in support of this, and that can be written into that text. So your ability to influence this is not done, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I think
Obviously, as a group, you would be it would be finished as a commission's body recommendation, but as individuals, you still, I think, have a lot of ability to be supplying testimony towards the approval or adoption.
I think what I'm uncomfortable with, honestly, is the language then. We would be putting forth a adoption of a resolution adopting the sustainability action plan when we don't actually have the sustainability action plan in front of us.
Mhm.
I don't think that's appropriate, is I think where I'm coming down on that right now. If it was sustainability action plan framework, that'd be very different motion.
Given the uniqueness of this, because again, this is not,
But that's
this,
that's
yeah,
just
this
being
is
kind
coming
of a
before a
procedural
commission as this is not a required procedural step to
Yeah.
come before you, right? So your recommendation is not required. We, by policy, want to have the
Yeah.
plan commission give, obviously, its elements. So that's why we even entertained tonight's meeting versus saying, oh, we've got to set up this special meeting. So I think an amended recommendation could be appropriate. The recommendation as drafted could be appropriate. In essence or theory, how comfortable you are with that or not, it's a different question. Or setting special meeting. I think those are kind of the 3 main options that you'd want to look at.
I like an amended recommendation. Honestly, I think it's our approval of the process, the direction that it's headed in, without actually saying the plan. I don't think that's accurate. Would that be something that others would be comfortable with? Cool.
Yeah.
Because then again, even if we forward a negative recommendation or if we table it, we say nothing, it could still come to city council before we meet again, because that's just the process.
Right.
So we're not stymieing the flow of anything, but it just in the issue of accuracy, potentially. I will actually make that recommendation then.
Oh, can I make one other quick
Yeah.
comment? I was just looking again at the strategy around energy efficiency. Yay. And it might be, I don't have like exact wording to recommend, but I think when you showed the example, kind of like a little card filled out of the implementation plan, it was a lot broader than just offering incentives, as it should be. It's kind of like promoting this ecosystem that increases the accessibility of energy efficiency, renewables, and improving indoor air quality. So maybe just like reframing the name of that strategy to reflect that instead of just incentives.
Yeah,
That's a good note.
I can do that. And I was also thinking about one of the others, green space. I feel like green doesn't exactly represent what we're thinking about. Like, it's a general term. Natural space in Moab is not necessarily green.
Right.
So I think renaming that one also would be more accurate.
Like it. Okay. I move that the City of Moab Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to City Council on the adoption of resolution number 28, 2023. This is an amendment to the recommended motion in our packet. This would instead be a resolution adopting the 2023 Sustainability Action Plan, the framework of which has been discussed by the Planning Commission. Because the resolution is still for the plan, so I didn't want to amend that.
That works.
Cool.
I'll second.
You're our
It's my job today.
secondhand miles there. Okay, we have a motion, by myself, an amended motion, excuse me, and then a second from Miles. Any further discussion? Thanks, everyone. It's an interesting sort of needle to thread, but hopefully, Alexi, that is acceptable to you guys too. All right, Corey, whenever you're ready.
Perfect. We'll do a roll call vote. Mikkel,
Aye.
Carolyn.
Aye.
Miles.
Aye.
Kaya.
Aye. All right, motion passes, amended motion passes. Thanks, everyone. Our last item for the evening, our last action item, 5.2, consideration of approval of the 2023 RCOG City of Moab Dispersed Parking Amenities Letter of Support. This is a briefing and a possible action, and it looks like Richard is coming to speak with us.
Yes, my name's Richard. I'm the transit coordinating grant writer. As I'm sure all of you know, we have a dispersed parking project that is shovel ready and has recently had a bid awarded, and so it's going to be starting pretty soon. Originally, it was funded with hotspot money, and it really was just going to be for parking infrastructure and bulb outs and things like that. Wasn't going to look incredibly amazing. So the city decided to put in $1 million for amenities such as benches and pergolas and trees and bushes and bollard luminaires and things like that. And as all projects go, there have been a lot of cost overruns. And so we are approaching the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity for their Rural Community Opportunity Grant. And we need to tie this project into economic development. And so my job will be to describe the economic development of what it is to provide 32 benches for residents and tourists to sit on, what it is to provide trees and pergolas for people to take shade, rest under in the summer months, and what it is to provide more lighting at night, because there will be 30-ish bollard luminaires at crosswalk intersections where we have these also pedestrian bulb outs, which reduce the distance you have to cross to get across the street. So to submit an RCOG grant, you have to have support from the Planning Commission if you're a municipality. And so I come here tonight asking your body to support what I wrote for you. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions or anything like that? Yeah.
It's a very poetic letter.
Oh, if you ever read any of my grants, I like flowery language, and
We'll
I'm
smell,
part of
you will
the
smell the RCOG funded shrubs in Forbes.
yes.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite
Really?
line in
We're
the
really
letter.
creating a sense of place. I'm part of the engineering department technically, and
Oh, yeah.
so originally, like an
Sorry.
engineer, engineers would have written this before, and they
I
keep
will respect
keep
that for-
they
yeah.
keep laughing at me for the
No, I
language
love it.
use, but
I think it's great.
it's
I'm
proven
all for just
successful,
like
so.
jazzing anything up as possibly can.
It's a
Yeah.
beautifully written letter, and I totally respect what you're trying to do.
Yeah, my main question would be, I think, the thing that always comes to mind with grants is what are the other times that the city might want to go for this grant money, and what would it potentially be used for, understanding that we may only get one bite at an apple within a certain time frame or just period.
Mhm.
Is this something that's been discussed? at the city as far as like what the rural community opportunity grants could be. Could it be for things that might sort of rest higher on the priority list of residents than this particular sort of funding appeal?
I don't know, have you heard anything about that?
Yes, and again, I wish Michael Black, our Community Development Director, were here to address this specifically, as he is the point that is coordinating with that. I think he's coordinating with our the EDAP group as well, surrounding available grants as well as established grant systems that we're either engaged in or others within our region are engaged in, to make sure we're not competing amongst ourselves and pulling money away from other projects, but also what projects we have in action that we can actually pull that grant money towards versus trying to solicit money for future projects that are not vetted, not approved, that we don't have systems for. So this currently is supported by the Community Development Department in that action. So the short answer to your question is yes, that is being evaluated. I can't speak to what extent that interplays with not only the other projects within the county, but within our own priority project lists and capital improvements. But the short answer is yes, that is being considered.
And also, this is a shovel-ready project, so in theory, it won't take too long to do this. You can't apply for an RCOG grant if you already have one open and in progress. And so we won't be able to apply for something again until we get this project finished. So,
I would really like to see that money be spent for residential stuff and not more van life parking areas. Honestly.
yeah. I would say that this is beneficial to residents as well. Creating a more walkable city benefits all.
See, and that's where I disagree. I, as a resident, I don't spend time downtown. I'm only downtown because I work here. So I honestly, I love the letter and I respect what you're trying to do.
What is the timeline on the application here? And I apologize, that's probably in the packet.
It is due on November 17th.
I will say, as a resident who has a home that is very close to downtown and often has any number of random people parked in front of my home because they are parking there to go walk around downtown. And essentially, I don't mind the idea of expanded parking availability for people who want to come down and experience downtown that isn't just in the residential neighborhoods adjacent to downtown. I think, at least for me, the idea that there's a normalized space for that and that I don't occasionally have to deal with someone trying to sleep in their van in front of my house and stuff like that.
But it doesn't need benches and
So if
this, that, and the other.
I feel this conversation is getting a little out of context of what it is that this letter of support is written for. I think I'm hearing some commentary about dispersed parking in general, and the fact that we're going after that. This letter of support is to solicit money for funds or improvements that have already been committed to. So this is reducing funds that our locals are going to pay. Is that not correct?
Yeah.
So this is happening. This will give it the opportunity for locals to pay less for the improvements that are going in to be installed, or will be. Again, this is a shovel-ready project. This has been going on for 3 years. Almost 4 years. So what I don't want to do is get into too much communication about the overall dispersed parking situation. This is very, very, very specific. So if we can keep it to that aspect, I think that's appropriate. But certainly at a discussion item table, if we want to bring that up at a different time, that would be an appropriate time to, I think, have these bigger, broader conversations that probably ought to be had. So
Yeah.
I'm not diminishing the value of that. I just want to keep us on track.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely
so this was a UDOT hotspot funding award, part of it, right? And then the city matched $1 million.
We're adding
Originally
in-
committed to $1 million. Now we're
Yeah.
at a little over 2 million.
So this would help.
But into that.
This was an
get the
elective
background here.
option that
Yeah.
UDOT was not covering, that the council did commit to.
And so grant or no grant, lighted bollards are going in, benches are going in.
Yes.
I think my main issue with the letter is I think it's very beautifully written. I think, if you've been paying attention to sort of community conversation, certainly in the last few months, as there's been discussion of downtown, I don't think it's only a visitor thing to beautify downtown. I think there's been a lot of feedback. There have been people who've come to speak to city council about it. It's been written about in the papers. There's been a lot of discussion on Facebook and all of this stuff, how no one, as locals, we don't spend time downtown because it's not an easy or pleasant thing to do, and there's cars everywhere and people are gonna like clothesline you with their door and trucks are whizzing by at 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's just not a nice sort of experience. I certainly understand that. I think the business owners downtown are our local businesses, and I do think supporting their businesses and trying to make it so, for example, a local might feel more inclined to visit Desert West Office Supply instead of going to Grand Junction and going to Walmart for something because it's a little bit easier for them to just get there in the first place. It doesn't seem like such a task to park downtown or walk downtown or all the things. I feel that way too. And I literally work in an office on Main Street and I don't want to like walk down the stairs sometimes. I think that's certainly that's an extremely local focused concern. My main feedback on the letter would be that in the interest of the community and making it much more apparent that this is something that is being sought after on behalf of the community, that there be more focus on the safety element of this. I would love to see that. Some slight tweaks in the letter to just, it's in there. It's not what jumps out at you though. And I think bollards are for safety, places for people to rest in the shade are for safety, trees, that this is all community health focused stuff.
Yeah. It'll be a big part of the grant.
I would want that to be the thing that jumps out at you the most. And I do think that actually strengthens the letter, presenting it to the Community Opportunity Grant folks. So maybe just a stronger emphasis on that, because I think that is something that is I think across the board, something that people agree on in the community. The piece in the paper a month ago about safety downtown, and I think that's really, I think highlighting that is probably something that could just bolster the letter and honestly bolster community support for this part of the project too, even though it might be mixed on whether or not the underlying thing is something we should be doing. So.
And I think,
What are the other components of the application besides the letter?
Oh, it's just a letter for you guys, but then there's just me breaking down. So I'm going to be going over how many businesses are nearby to these spots and how I'm going to break down each street and how many like bollards and whatnot are in each street, for example, on which corners they are at, and breaking it down by street. So that way we can show the economic benefit of like the food truck park is here, and across from the food truck park, this grant will add the bike racks and a pergola and trees next to the food truck park. And then so the food truck park gets this benefit because there's more accessibility and more of a desire to just hang around that area and things like that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's helpful just for, like what do you need to put in the letter that won't be reflected in other parts of the application?
Yeah.
For example.
Obviously you want it to be consistent, not like
I-
spinning a tail in the letter that doesn't actually reflect in the application.
Right now.
Yeah.
Right.
17.
Yeah.
I will say from a right now perspective, the idea that this essentially just saves us locals taxpayer money, that this project is being paid for one way or another. And if this grant can be a part of it, and once this project is closed, we have access to this grant again. Like, as you said, it's only, you have access to it as long as you are not currently in a project that is already being funded by one of these grants, and that it is likely to just reduce the amount of money the city is going to have to spend on the project anyways. And I mean, as a local, I actually do use downtown quite a bit, and some lighted ballers and just generally nicer space is something I'm happy to see.
Mhm.
And so I personally, you know, with a complete appreciation for what Kaya had to say about phrasing the letter in such a way that you are highlighting the fact that a lot of this is being done with, I guess, locals in mind is a good way to put it. I'm in support of this.
I mean, but also the reality is that the state loves supporting tourism in Moab. And
Sure.
so there's not a bad reason to have that be an emphasis in the letter as
Absolutely.
well. I think just making sure that the community knows that this is going to be a net benefit for people that live and work here, not just as something that is a tourism incentive and also a tourism focus. I think that there's a tourism incentive and then there's a local focus on top of that, which is really beneficial. You know, and we need the gap funding, frankly. So yes. We can entertain a motion.
So I motion to approve the 2023 RCOG City of Moab Dispersed Parking Amenities Letter of Support and Grant.
We have a motion from Miles, second from anyone?
I can't second my own motion.
What do we do without Miles to do it? Okay, we don't have a second.
I'll second the
Okay.
motion.
Okay, we have a motion from Miles, a second from Carolyn. Discussion.
This is a majority vote passes.
Yes.
I mean, essentially where I'm at is while the greater issue of downtown and parking and putting funds into improvements for tourists versus locals is something that could be endlessly debated here in Moab. That the short-term effects of this is it saves the city some money and we end up with a nicer downtown, and that I can be in support of.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
I also agreed with some of the like amended language suggestions that you made, Kaya, and I'm not sure that it, you know, this is for to the Office of Economic Opportunity and a community opportunity grant. So I don't know that those little language tweaks would be make or break. And I think that the pieces that it makes the obvious tie to promoting economic opportunity by helping with the beautification of the downtown, which maybe is the overarching goal. But also if we wanted to recommend making minor language tweaks that wouldn't cause you to miss the deadline for the application, I would be okay with that too.
I think I'm okay with the letter as is now. I think what's most important to me is that we understand the intent of this. We understand the community focus, and that residents understand that, frankly. You know, it's incredibly important and we need to do a better job explaining that. Just sort of my soapbox for the evening, I think, is just communication and proactive communication on things like this. Like, this is not the city spending more money. This is the city having a project in the pipeline and trying to offset costs to residents with money that is available that they love to give out to communities like Moab for projects like this. And what is the disincentive to go after that money? And again, which is why I asked about, are there other projects that the city has that we couldn't go after this money for? And it doesn't sound like right now there's anything in the pipeline that this would prohibit us from going after the money for. If there was, that might change how I feel about it, honestly.
Agreed. Absolutely.
I guess I can bring up what was talked about at the EDAB meetings. There were ideas of like
Mhm.
sidewalks and things like that.
Yeah.
But we have a downtown master plan, hopefully in the works at some point, and that would address a lot of the things that this RCOG grant would apply for in the future, once we have that in place.
Could this grant be used for roads?
Wouldn't get very far.
For like
Yeah.
10 feet of a road?
Cane Creek.
For like 3 potholes behind City Market?
Be nice.
I know.
Would be nice.
I'm, you know, that I'm. This is always the context that any spending or any financial desire or anything is brought up in the context of, it's just prioritization. And so I just want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind and communicating that, like, this is not money that the city can use to fix the jacked up chip seal. It's money that is for things like this, and we're not taking from one pocket to put in the other.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if we don't take this grant, then the city has to spend more money on a project that is already happening and has less money
With
to-
general fund money that could be used.
that
for
could
those
be
other
used for
things, yeah.
roads, exactly. Yeah, and I'd rather take this grant and save that money for the potholes behind City Market or the waviness at Cane Creek
Yeah.
than spend it on principal and not receive this grant.
Cane Creek won't be a problem in the future, but like the potholes,
But I thought it was gonna
that's
be-
underway.
It's supposed to be a solution in the future. Wait a minute.
I kind of like the wave personally.
Like, but currently I would find it to be an easier argument for economic development, because that's what this focus of this grant is,
Yeah.
for the amenities provided for dispersed parking than for the potholes behind there, and perhaps money that we can save can go to those potholes.
Yeah.
So
Fine, let's vote.
Hey now, that's my job.
I think that was a really valuable reminder of, like, it is very difficult to clearly message what's happening here in a way that
Yes.
doesn't just make it look like random money is being spent in ways that people wouldn't necessarily prioritize it for. So I don't know, like, who that task falls upon, but it's an important one.
I think we have a commission here that's willing to address and I think help strategize some of these bigger pictures. But like I said, this is a project that unfortunately tumbled from what was an approved and then generated construction level project that faced a similar quandary that we just entered into that didn't come out of that tailspin. And then we lost a project, lost a lot of funding and a lot of time, and they're finally now recovering with that, which actually this is the offspring of that. And so it'd be really nice to see this come to a completion and us actually succeed in that and then move on to new projects. Because that's the idea, is if we continue to fight over limited money that we have now, that money never gets spent, the projects never get accomplished. Yet if we just are able to advance those projects, we can move on to new projects. So we start accumulating successes rather than fighting over projects that actually never get done.
Yep.
I think that's a frustration that's being vocalized, that I think this commission can actually have that bandwidth and capacity to coordinate with the council, because the council, were the decision makers of how we were going to re-navigate this particular project or the offspring projects from that. And I think this commission has the voice and capacity to do that. So I didn't mean to diminish the discussion that was being had. I just want us to focus on this item and not have us go into tailspin that would have led us down a path that we don't have the power. But new projects coming forward, let's have this commission be on the front end of those, vocalizing all those things in advance. So I want to commend you for that, but also I want to help guide you to the right places to really have that be effective communication.
All right.
Could I amend? There is one spot in the letter I would super love to just add something to.
can they vote on the letter tonight and then me make changes later?
Well,
Probably not.
so,
If the letter
how do
needs
you
to be
mean?
approved by the planning commission in order to go.
if there's a specific amendment, I
Oh,
think it can be made a recommendation for the specific amendment.
Yeah.
And then that could be done.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to come back to plan commission. Is that what you're saying? It does not.
Okay.
They can make the recommendation. We
Yep.
can make
Cool.
the staff amendments and then it can be recommended with that modification. Does
Okay.
that work for?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's sort of in the preamble, and I just
Mhm.
think adding maybe what we discussed into the preamble. Okay, so
We do have an active
yes, we do.
motion.
Yeah,
to-
I was just
to
sort of
amend that. Okay.
prefacing
Mhm.
that. So we have a motion to approve the letter as is and a second. I haven't done this in a while. Offering an amendment to the motion.
That both Miles and Carolyn
Yeah.
would have to agree to.
Yes.
Otherwise we would, and then we can also, I was checking with Michael about this. Last time we had a similar situation. We don't have to vote on it. We can just let the commission can agree just to let that motion die. And then we can reinitiate with a new motion. We're not stuck to actually executing that vote.
The motion.
We can.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, depending on, last time it was cleaner just to let that other one die and to start
always-
over. We don't have to do that necessarily.
As part of the discussion, I'll offer up what I'm proposing for an
Correct.
amendment.
Yep.
So in the second sentence, it says where UDOT hotspot will fund the parking and pedestrian infrastructure, RCOG and City of Moab will fund the amenities to create a more beautiful, accessible, and inviting downtown to explore. I would love to amend the end of that sentence to say, we'll fund the amenities to create a more beautiful, accessible, and safe and inviting downtown for visitors and residents. Apologies if that is slightly repetitive, because I know it says visitors and residents in the next sentence. I just think having that focus a little bit more upfront is, it expresses our intent.
Mhm.
It's not a resident seeing this letter out of context going, what the heck? It's like, it's there, I think. As long as, Richard, you think that that is in keeping with the rest of the grant application?
I certainly think it is.
Okay.
So I do feel bad now because
You don't need
my
to,
intent for the grant was to address safety a lot,
Yeah.
and that the word accessibility, I guess it doesn't holistically address safety.
I just think it's not
and-
as, it doesn't jump
Yeah.
out in the same
Yeah.
way. Mhm.
So
think
I
it
fully
does.
support this. I do
Yeah.
because this is how I'm going to approach the grant anyways. So
That's great.
yeah,
Do
I
you
just wish
have-
I wish I wrote it in the first place.
No,
Were we
that's
able to
okay.
capture the specific amendment there?
I
was-
I'm going to rewatch.
Okay.
unless-
Okay. Let's see.
Well, if I
There was
make. a new
basically two
motion, I'll say it
additional
again.
language elements is
Yeah.
what I logged, but
Yep,
Well, and whatever's more convenient, I'm in support of that. So if we
Okay.
can add that to the motion, or if we'd rather let my motion die.
I
More-
think you could accept that. And then Carolyn, so as the motion making commissioner, you can accept that. And then Carolyn, as the seconding commissioner, you would also have to accept it. So if you do accept it, so Miles, I'm taking that as. you
I would like
accept.
to accept the text amendment motion as worded by Kaya to my current motion.
That works.
I also accept it.
Okay.
First for me too.
You second the amended motion.
Yes.
We're all just learning Robert's rules.
We
again
do.
Here.
I was
At 9
skimming
o'clock
through
at
our
night?
book. Yeah. Okay, so we have a clean
Mhm.
current amended motion.
Yes.
Is there any additional discussion?
I know, I understand it seems a little superfluous, but I just think that if we can, we might as well.
I support.
And it seems like that was something you were already thinking of doing, so.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think it makes sense because you say safely twice in the letter, but it's down lower in the letter. So I think having it right up and center does help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
just, like set the mind context around that.
All right. If we don't have any further discussion, we can take a vote on the amended motion.
All right, we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Okay.
Mikkel?
You start at the other end of the room.
I can,
Thanks.
sure. Miles,
Aye.
Carolyn,
Aye.
Kaya,
Aye.
Mikkel.
Majority passes this.
It would.
Yeah.
Okay, then nay.
Okay.
Motion passes. Can we have a discussion about that? I'm curious your reasoning for waiting to see how other commissioners voted
Yeah,
before.
typically
I,
findings, this is a totally discretionary action, so findings aren't required
Mhm.
for staff, but I think you're the chair, so I think
you can.
I just want to be on the record saying findings aren't recommended for this particular action.
sure,
But in
for
other
sure.
items, if we vote nay, you need to provide findings for your decision if it's a administrative level approval. Anyway, that being said, this is discretionary. So yes, I think that's a qualifying question, sure.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if you as a personal commissioner want something to pass, that you vote yay for it, or you make an amendment to make it acceptable into something that you want to pass. Obviously you can still do what you want, anybody can, but I just think that's probably, to me, that seems like good governance. So just making sure that we're not, for example, if it's something that might be perceived as controversial, but if you do actually want it to pass, standing behind that and not looking for maybe the cover of other commissioners voting yes, so that it might be perceived as like, well, I voted against it in the future. I'm not saying that's what you're doing
I
here
understand.
at all.
I am.
But I just like want to put that out there because I've had those thoughts too. So it's like, oh, I don't know. So you don't have to justify. I just want to sort of throw that out there. So all right. Any other input after that? Anybody? We good? All right.
Thank you, Richard.
Yes, thank
It's a
you.
beautifully written letter.
Appreciate
That's a skill right there.
it. I wish I had touched on safety more.
Awesome.
All right. Future agenda items. Telling me, man.
There's more.
All right, so I was wanting to confirm, but right now we have moved beyond, I believe, all of our plan and ordinance level actions. For December 14th, as we are not having a special meeting on the 7th, to be clear, we did not need to engage in that. December 14th will be our next and final meeting of the year as a regular meeting. I believe we will only have one action item, which is a site plan
Mhm.
action item is what we're counting on. So we have
Current planning.
what we're very much hoping for
Right.
is still working through the planning process, but the Red Rock Flats, which is
Can you remember how to do that?
right, it's been a while. That was a pre-annexation agreement and then annexation process. So they're now executing the site plan for the development of that project. What was called the Shamrock annexation, which will now be the Red Rock Flats. The aspect of that is that this will be a 50% AEH development. So it will be our first planning commission approval of a designation aspect of AEH. So it's pretty exciting. We're trying to work with the project on just final touches to get it ready for you guys, but we're pretty enthusiastic and optimistic that it should be coming before you on.
So remind me
14th.
where, especially with the name change, where the Shamrock property is.
On the extension of Aggie Boulevard, the
Okay,
USU campus down there, this was an annexation onto that area. Yeah, it's immediately adjacent to the highway.
But not the Aggie townhouse. That is-
No, not the Aggie townhomes, correct. But I think right now from DRT, that's the only thing that was, I think, really very likely coming. We have a couple other, well, actually, we've had an uptake in applications, but I think it's the only one that's gonna be about ready.
Yeah, and possibly just a minor subdivision as well.
Oh, that's true. Yep. So maybe some minor applications, including minor subdivisions, lot line adjustments, and maybe a couple other minor.
Yeah, not, I don't think there's any, I just think it's the one minor subdivision.
Maybe.
Yeah. Mhm.
We'll look at Alexi, on that one. So yeah, we're DRT and our actually more development level review is starting to bubble up again. We kind of had this lull, which was really convenient. Again, we had so many plans and so many dense ordinances to go through, but so I think at the moment we will count on at least one meeting in December for now. So that's it, I think, for future agenda items, unless Bryce or Anna have anything else.
Plus the year-end party at Woody's, right?
Ah, right. That's it.
Second.
Following that December meeting.
The city does have a holiday party, and I would like that the planning commission
know-
be invited this year for once.
I think that would be, I think that would be nice. I don't think we've had one since COVID. Or maybe we did have one last year.
Last year.
Yeah, that's right.
It was at Dewey's.
That's right.
No,
That's
I
right.
was a +1.
That's right. I had a,
But I personally was not invited.
I had a, Anna and I were both gone for that.
Both had some
We're-
things going on.
We were both out. Anyway, well, we're excited to hopefully participate this year.
That is not an official.
Kyle would take your invite if you were.
Yeah,
you know,
right?
Don't want to.
There you go.
We'll auction the invites out.
All right, thanks everyone. I feel like these meetings it's feast or famine. We either don't have a meeting or it's 3 hours long and there's
Yep.
absolutely no in between anymore. So thanks, guys.
Such
you.
really great discussion though.
Hey,
Truly,
that's all.
Yeah.
I do commend you for how serious and how much thought you give to this. It's really, from a staff perspective, we work really hard and that reflects in how hard you guys work. So I really
Well,
appreciate it.
it's easy to follow your lead, so thank you. All right, we are adjourned at 9:00 PM. Woo. Woof. Gosh.